I wasn't proud of the way the summer ended. 2 months earlier, I'd had a one-bedroom apartment with a leaky balcony, a coffee maker that needed coaxing, and a girlfriend who said my jokes were dad humor in the larval stage. Now the balcony was someone else's. The coffee maker was in the Goodwill bin behind a Dollar General, and the girlfriend, Maya, was on a different coast trying to reinvent herself. I still had the jokes. They sounded worse bouncing off the inside of my car. The car ran hot when the A/C was on, and the A/C was always on, because it was June in the foothills and Appalachia treats humidity like religion. My bank app had 2 digits before the decimal. Gas was an act of faith. I lined my receipts in the glove box like talismans, as if a paper trail could point a way out. So I said yes to a job I didn't understand. The listing was a screenshot someone's aunt posted on Facebook. Ash Pines Community Trust is hiring. Night Security Distribution Center, $18. 75/HR plus shift diff. Must be reliable, background check required. The photo was crooked, the font a sort of thrift store Times New Roman, and it had a little changing of the guard clip art in the corner that made me think of door-to-door church flyers. I scrolled comments, 27 amens, 3 praying hands emojis, and a county commissioner's account saying, "So grateful for what app does for our families." No one explained what that was, but the address was concrete. County Road 19, 3 miles past the closed feed store with the whitewashed rooster painted on sheet metal. I knew the area. My dad used to buy nails there before the store closed, and he became the kind of guy who saved bent ones and tried to hammer them straight on the porch railing. I wore my last clean button-down, which had a coffee stain on the cuff I pretended was a shadow. The road out of town narrowed to 2 lanes, then to 1 and a shoulder where beer cans retired. Briars clawed the ditches. Someone had dumped a cracked Formica table at the bend, the legs pointing up like a dead centipede. The asphalt bled into dirt and then back again. And then, like a warehouse got lost in the woods and decided to make the best of it, Ash Pines appeared. It wasn't big by city standards, but out here anything with a loading dock looks like government. A low spread of metal siding, 3 roll-up doors, 1 office rectangle grafted onto the front. A sign above the main door showed a pine silhouette and a tagline in italic script, "We lift the littlest." A banner on the chain-link fence read "Hiring" in block letters as if it were yelling across a football field. There was 1 pickup truck in the lot, a white F-150 that still had the dealer's paper tag, parked at a slant as if in a hurry. I was early, or I was just anxious and couldn't tell the difference. The glass door stuck. I pulled twice before it gave, making a squeal that echoed down the hall. The lobby smelled like the HVAC at church, dust filtered through something citrus, overlaid by a sweetness like varnished wood. A tri-fold brochure stand sat on a particle board table. No brochures. A poster behind the makeshift receptionist station showed an infant swaddled in a quilt, square patterned with tiny green pine trees. Every child deserves a hope chest. A man stepped out from the hallway behind the counter. "Mr. Reeves," he said, smiling like we'd met at a cookout. "That's me," I said. Dan is fine. I'll stick with Daniel." He extended a hand across the desk. "Fletcher, you found us." His hand was dry and warm and held mine just a second longer than a stranger's, a practiced grip that reassured more than dominated. He wore a white Oxford shirt that made me hyper-aware of my coffee cuff, sleeves rolled to that precise, not too casual midpoint. The shirt was crisp but not new. I noticed a tiny mend near the elbow, white thread on white. His glasses were horn-rimmed but not kitsch, the kind of frames you see in old yearbooks and on baristas who know 3 ways to pour over. On him they looked like a uniform. "You drove from town?" he asked. "Yeah, the roads are rural." He grinned. "That's the word for it. We're temperate rainforest and the county forgot. Come on, let me show you why you got lost to find your way." I laughed because that's what you do when someone tosses a slogan-shaped sentence. He gestured toward the hallway. The walls here were painted a non-committal beige with frames hung at even intervals. Photos of smiling women in T-shirts with the Ash Pines pine tree logo holding boxes with lids tied in twine. Men with tape measures. Toddlers with handprint paint on butcher paper. In every shot there was a chest made of wood somewhere in the frame, on a table, in a trunk of a car, in a living room at Christmas, the lid up and the inside lined with something pale. "I appreciate you making time," I said. "Short notice for me too." The notice was right on time. Need doesn't schedule itself. He walked with an easy cadence like a teacher strolling rows. "So, Daniel, I don't do a big interview. I don't ask where you see yourself in 5 years. The last man who asked me that, I told him hopefully not at my funeral, and the HR lady didn't like that. I'm going to ask you one thing and it will be enough." We stopped at a door with a plastic slider that said Quiet Zone, and a second one underneath that said EAR protection required in peel-up label maker tape. Fletcher put his hand on the push bar but didn't push yet. "Do you consider yourself nurturing?" It is a funny word in a man's mouth. It carries the weight of prove it and the soft underside of don't you dare lie. I thought of my mother's hands on my hair when I was little, the way she used to cut the tags out of my shirts because they scratched, before she got too tired to do small things. I thought of my father saying babying ruins boys, right before he'd fall asleep in front of the ball game with a beer balanced on his knee. I thought of Maya and the plant she bought for our apartment that I forgot to water, the way the leaves turned toward the window like they were trying to run away. "I try," I said. "I guess some days I'm better at it than others." "Honest," Fletcher said, "honest counts more than people who answer that question like it was the right answer on a test they found online." His smile smoothed into something neutral. "That word matters here. We don't run a prison, we run a program." "What's the program?" "You'll see it in a moment," he said and pushed the door open. The smell hit first. Not rot, not exactly. Fresh, sweet like a hardware store aisle where someone just opened a can of varnish and pine boards lean at attention. It pressed itself into the back of my throat and wrapped a memory there. The sound was second, a low, constant thrum like a neighbor's window unit through a wall. Not loud. Present. We entered a world of rows. The warehouse swallowed the office hall. The ceiling rose into corrugated shadows where metal rafters held cheap sodium lights that pretended to be daylight and failed. Racks stretched in parallel lanes as clean as a spreadsheet. On those racks, chests, hundreds, thousands maybe, nested like identical cousins. Cedar, or a cousin of cedar, finished to a soft shine, each with a curved lid like a treasure chest in a cartoon. Metal handles on the sides, a stenciled pine tree logo on the end of each. Tied to some of them, little paper tags hung from twine with numbers and in neat handwriting names. Wilcox 07, Pender 12, Mama T's Group, Church Lane. They were arranged with an OCD exactness that made me aware I was walking crooked. Hope chests, Fletcher said, almost reverently. Cedar's a natural moth deterrent. My grandmother kept quilts in one. We do more with them than moths. You ship these out. Distribution and preparation both. Locals pick up here. We're a hub for 4 counties. People think of charities as bins of old clothes and casseroles. We prefer a plan. A kit put together well says you matter. Dignity lands better than leftovers. We passed a pallet of shrink-wrapped lids, the plastic drawn glossy and tight like cellophane over deli meat. Fans on tall stands face down the main aisles, their big silver cages not spinning but angled like they had been. A few thicker industrial units hung from chains, the kind you see in gymnasiums, and their cowls collected dust like gray lace. The fans, I said. When they run, we prefer not to blow a worker's ears out, hence ear protection. He tapped the decal on the door we'd come through as if it could hear. We don't have a lot of workers on nights, so it'll mostly be you. The chest's off gas when they are fresh. No one likes a rash in July. Fans help, so does patience. He didn't offer me a mask. I didn't ask. That felt like revealing I had a throat. I coughed instead, casually, like the smell had been something outside and had just followed us in. Your main duty is perimeter checks and eyes on the aisles. We take pictures every 2 hours and match them to baseline, looking for any tumbles. The floor does this funny thing in wet seasons. He rocked his hand in the air, seesaw style. A little swell, a little settle. You'd think steel racks don't care about the ground, but the ground always cares. We strap the end caps, but sometimes something slips. We want to catch any before they take a nose dive. Lids aren't cheap. I peered down an aisle, some automatic scan in my brain trying to imagine that much weight sliding. You've had many fall. Fewer when someone's here to mind them, he said. We also lock the dock doors when the river's high because raccoons learned thumbs. Don't let the rural fool you, critters get into everything. He pointed to a scar on the lower roll-up, a crease like a handprint. That one's from a buck who thought he found a rival. As we walked, details compiled, the way you don't notice how many stop signs there are in a town until you ride a bike. Some chests had small painted motifs on their lids, folky things rendered in bright, almost primary colors. A pair of children flying a kite under a crooked sun, a row of geese, a tiny white church with a green lawn streaked by a rainbow, a lion lying down with a lamb that looked more like a cloud with ears. It felt old-fashioned, like something from a 1989 Sunday school pamphlet your aunt kept in a drawer with batteries. Do families decorate them? I asked. Sometimes we do. Sometimes they do. Sometimes the ladies from the quilting circle get crafty and we let them. There's a war in this world between pretty and useful. I pick both if I have the option. We passed the end of an aisle where a scuffed line on concrete made a gentle arc, as if something heavy had pivoted there and it left a testimony. I looked down and my stomach did that small lurch it does when your shoe slides on gravel near a ditch. The scuff was fresh. Forklift? I asked, too casual. Sometimes the pallet jack dances, he said, as if that were a joke we shared. He looked at me like a teacher does to see if you're following. I didn't know the steps yet, but I nodded like I'd heard the song. He led me past a small office cube built inside the larger space, a freestanding rectangle of drywall with 2 windows and blinds that had dusty hackles. Through the glass I saw 2 desks, one piled with paper, an old beige fax machine parked like a bread box on top. The other was neat as a photograph staged for a manual, a pen exactly perpendicular to a calendar blotter. A dorm fridge in the corner had a magnet shaped like a pineapple. Magnet letters spelled out "Feel Free," and then someone had added an R with a different color so it read "Feel Freer." The handle was wrapped in blue painter's tape as if to remind itself not to let go. "That'll be your station," Fletcher said. "Coffee maker works if you sweet talk it. Don't touch the freezer unless you want to buy me lunch. Does it break on people? It breaks my heart with its inconsistency." He smiled so his teeth flashed. "Someone left the door open on a weekend last summer and a lot of frozen casseroles became soup. I don't like soup that much." "Got it. I'll keep my distance." We turned a corner into another row longer than the last, the kind of length that makes your eye lose scale. If you stared too long, the lines vibrated. The varnish smell rose a notch, like the air was a pine-flavored cough drop. The temperature had a warehouse's indifference to human comfort. A bead of sweat tracked my spine under my shirt, and I pictured the fabric going dark between my shoulder blades and hoped Fletcher wasn't the kind of person who noticed that in other people. "What kind of background check?" I asked. I filled out the form, but it was quick. "County court, basic criminal, the usual drug screen." He said it matter of fact without the suspicion some bosses put into it. "We're not a bank. If you once forgot to return a library book, we'll survive." I returned mine, I said. "Mostly. Your references were solid." I submitted none. "Exactly," he said, and for a second I didn't know if he was joking. "Sometimes the best reference is the way you walk into a room." We stood at the mouth of the center aisle, the main artery, and he stopped, hands on his hips, taking it in like a farmer does a field. I followed his gaze. A light flickered 3 aisles over and steadied. Something in the upper fan's cages rattled and then settled again like a coin in a dryer. "You got anybody at home?" he asked, still looking forward. I said. "We're not right now. Give it time. People are clay when they're scared. They dry into something else when they're safe." He glanced at me then. "We try to be a kiln for folks here, warm them into shape." He had a way of saying folks that didn't feel condescending. Maya would have rolled her eyes when someone talked like that. It would have made me want to defend them, and then I'd resent her for making me the defender. The coil of those arguments could strangle a day. "What's in the chests?" I asked. "Care kits mostly. New baby supplies. We partner with churches and the local hospital. A Bible sometimes. A quilt someone's aunt made. Soap that won't make a newborn rash. A letter to say human beings are in this with you." He said it like he'd said it 100 times, and it didn't get less true with repetition. He walked forward 2 paces and rested his palm on the curve of one lid like it was the back of a dog he trusted. He didn't open it. His hand stayed a second too long to be purely demonstrative. "What does night security do other than taking the pictures?" "Lock the doors. Watch for raccoons and for men who think charity warehouses mean free stuff. If a chest takes a tumble, you log it and we'll manage the rest." "You ever used a two-way?" "In a grocery store." I mimed clicking a mic on my shoulder. Teenage me thought that was power. "You'll get one of ours then. And these." He reached into the messenger bag I hadn't noticed he'd been carrying, the kind of leather softened by years, and pulled out a hard case. He popped the latches with a pleasing little CHK. Inside, nestled in custom-cut foam, sat a pair of noise-canceling headphones the color of an appliance, off-white going toward bone, with thick padded cups and a braided cord coiled like a snake that didn't mind. He lifted them with 2 hands like they were heavy and held them out to me. "You'll want these," he said. "The fans are loud." I took them automatically, who doesn't take an offered object. And the weight surprised me. Not just heft, intent. The pads were smooth and cool the way gear gets when it's stored right. The headband had no cracks. A little engraved plate near the hinge had a serial number etched into it, the kind of detail only people who register equipment notice. "The fans don't sound that loud," I said, and heard my voice do that tentative thing, the trailing off, asking him to meet me halfway so I didn't sound like I was challenging him. "They're not running now," he said. "When the varnish is set and we're not working in the lanes, we let the room rest. When we're fresh off a paint and seal day, it's like standing inside a hair dryer. Your ears won't forgive you at 2 in the morning. There's a reason middle-aged men say huh too much. Protect your future hus." I smiled because he was disarming when he wanted to be. But a small bright thought lit up in a far corner of my brain like a pilot light. The door we'd come through said EAR protection required. It didn't say optional. People don't put required on signs because they think you'll be comfortable. "Is there anything else I should know?" I asked, test piloting a casual voice I hoped hid the calculation. "Like quirks, places the cameras don't reach, squirrels who know lock codes." Fletcher tapped the headphones with his knuckle. "Just mind the fans, keep an eye on the aisles, don't touch the freezer. If you get spooked, text me, not the police. The sheriff knows us. He'll call me anyway. Save us a roundabout." And he paused. He had a way of stepping into silence like stepping across a stream, one foot holding, testing the next stone. And try to be the kind of person who reads what's written on the inside. The inside of what? He looked past me at a wall or through it, and for half a beat I thought he was looking at a different warehouse laid over ours like tracing paper. Then he looked back and the moment was gone. "You'll see it," he said. "Most folks do when it's time." He turned as if that ended the tour. It probably did. He walked me back along the center lane, the cedar smell a constant now, like the room had decided we were friends and it could be itself. The thrum of the high fans never changed volume. The chests never moved. I stared at one in my periphery until my eyes watered, waiting for anything, settling wood, a trick of parallax. Nothing obliged. At the office cube, he opened the door and stood aside so I could go in first, as if it mattered which of us crossed that threshold. A clock on the wall ticked with the cheap cheer of a schoolroom. On the desk, a stack of forms faced me like a polite dare. Employment agreement, W-4, direct deposit authorization, night log template. A pen lay exactly where you'd expect, pointed toward the signature line. "Background clears in 72 hours if the clerk isn't fishing," Fletcher said. "But we can get you started with training tonight if you're up for it. We do more good in this world when we don't procrastinate." "I can start," said too quickly. Rent was a thing with a date, and dates do not wait for you to parse metaphors. "Good," he said. "There's dignity in doing, and we trade in dignity here." His phone buzzed on the desk. He glanced at it, not apologetically, just with that small, habitual check people do when a device reminds them it exists. His thumb made a tiny motion like he was rubbing a worry stone, and then he pocketed the phone again without answering. The gesture felt old. The phone felt new. He pointed to a laminated map taped to the wall. "Dock doors here and here. Restrooms there. God bless the person who cleans them when the men's room is down one ply. We tend to get quiet after 10. The coyotes talk like they're telling stories on the far hill. If you listen hard, you can learn a new language." "What language is that?" "Want," he said. "Coyotes tell the truth too loud for most people." I signed where he pointed. I printed my name next to places where the printer had made lines faint on one side like it was tired of its own job. I initialed a box that said no firearms and another that said no night visitors and another that said report any suspicious activity in bold, as if suspicion could be specified and filed. When I finished, he stacked the pages, squared their corners with a soft thump on the desk, and slid the top copy into a folder with my name on a sticker. I didn't remember telling him how to spell it. He set the headphones on top of the folder like a bow on a gift. "You'll want these," he said again, softer this time, like he was telling them rather than me. "The fans are loud." I nodded and felt the weight of the cups in my hands. The pads pressed my palms cool. The braided cord rested against my wrist. In the window behind Fletcher, the long aisle showed itself like a runway, cedar lids bright where the lights found them and dark where the distance bent them into shadow. Somewhere above us, a fan's cage ticked once, an insect of sound, and then held its breath. The first night on my own, I parked under the one security light that hadn't burned out. The lamp hummed and drew insects like it was the last warm place on earth. Beyond its circle of safety, the woods pressed in close tree trunks like ribs around a lung. My car ticked as it cooled, and the air carried that damp electric smell before rain. Inside, the warehouse was as Fletcher had left it. Immaculate rows, varnish-stung air, fans mounted like sentinels. I carried the headphones in one hand, their braided cord brushing against my knuckles. I paused. The loud fans Fletcher had warned about, they barely breathed. Just a faint, lazy hum, more background than hazard. I stood there in the center aisle, head cocked, waiting for a volume spike. Nothing. The sound was thin, almost apologetic, the kind of white noise you'd pay for in an app to fall asleep. I slid the headphones on anyway, more out of obligation than need. They clamped down tight, sealing me in a cocoon where the fans vanished altogether. I did the first perimeter check like that, clipboard in hand, pen already smudging ink on my thumb. By the second lap, the cups pinched my temples. Sweat pooled where the pads hugged skin. The cord tugged at my belt like a leash. That was when the curiosity began to gnaw. I waited until I was sure no one would pop in. Fletcher, a random volunteer, some janitor I hadn't met. Then, in the middle of aisle 6, I slid the headphones off. The silence hit like a wall, not empty silence. The other kind, the heavy kind, where your ears strain for sound and invent it. I could hear my heartbeat thumping in my head, the fabric of my shirt shifting when I breathed. Even the tick of the cooling overhead lights felt amplified. I walked slower, suddenly aware of how loud boots on concrete can be. My clipboard tapped against my thigh like a hammer on sheet metal. The smell of cedar was stronger without the muffle of the pads, or maybe I was just paying attention now. Sweet and sharp like pencil shavings left in sun. Halfway down the row, something scraped, wood against metal. I froze. One chest 4 shelves up had shifted a fraction, just enough to leave a pale arc on the steel it sat on. The noise had been small, but in the suffocating silence it rang out like chalk dragged across a board. I tilted my head, waiting. Nothing. I swallowed, throat dry. "Loose floor," I whispered. My own voice bounced off the racks, too loud, too human. Then came the reply. Faint, barely more than air pushed through wood grain. "Thank you." My spine locked. Every muscle froze as if my body thought stillness could erase the moment. The warehouse held its breath. The words had been there, not imagination, not echo words, polite, quiet, childlike almost. "Thank you." I took a step back. The clipboard slipped in my grip, corner clapping against my thigh. I scanned the racks, searching for logic. Maybe an old recording, some speaker left on by mistake. But the only thing stacked here were chests, row after row of cedar smiles. I managed a laugh, thin and cracked. Great, talking to wood, that's where I'm at. The silence waited, and then it broke. A whisper again, closer this time, drawn out slow, like someone savoring each syllable from behind the lid of a box. Daniel. I didn't sleep after that first whisper. I told myself I would, that I'd clock out, drive home, collapse face first on the couch with a plate of gas station nachos and let exhaustion erase the night. But every time I closed my eyes, the sound replayed. Thank you, Daniel, softer than breath and somehow heavier than thunder. By the time I pulled back into the lot the following evening, the warehouse looked different. Not visually. The siding was still dinged, the security lamp still humming, but something in me had shifted. The building wasn't just metal and bolts anymore. It was a mouth, and I was walking inside it willingly. The silence pressed closer the moment I stepped into the center aisle. That was when memory kicked in, sudden as a migraine. I was 8 years old, hiding in my parents' garage. My father was drunk again, yelling about bills, slamming doors like punctuation. Mom had already checked out hours earlier, retreating to her room with the TV volume turned up too high to be an accident. In the corner of that garage was a battered toy trunk. Yellow paint flaking, one hinge bent, stickers of cartoon astronauts half peeled away. It had belonged to some older cousin before it was mine. It smelled like dust, oil, and something sweetly rotten, like an attic that had tried too long to stay cheerful. That night, I'd crawled inside, pulled the lid down, and hugged my knees so tight my legs went numb. I whispered, to who, to what, maybe to myself, maybe to the trunk. Please, I'd said again and again. Please, please, and somewhere in the stale dark I thought I heard an answer. Not words, not really, just the suggestion of a voice curling back toward me. Enough to make me keep talking, enough to make me believe I wasn't alone. Now, standing between rows of hope chests, the memory felt less like a recollection and more like a connection. As if what I'd heard last night was the same voice from the trunk decades ago. I shook my head hard, trying to jolt myself back into the present. Rational explanations, echoes, stress, anything but ghosts in wood. Clipboard in hand, I forced myself down aisle 4. Rows of cedar lids curved like the backs of sleeping animals. The varnish smell clung, sweet and sour, tugging memory with every breath. Halfway down the row, I stopped. My knuckles hovered. It was stupid. The kind of dare middle school kids make at sleepovers, but I did it anyway. I knocked. Once. Sharp. The sound carried through the racks. Silence. I almost laughed, and then, knock, not from the same chest, 2 rows over, something tapped back. I froze, clipboard slipping an inch in my grip. My mouth went dry. No way, I muttered. I knocked again, lighter this time, 3 quick taps. The reply came slower, 3 echoes, hollow and deliberate. It was impossible to tell which chest it came from. The sound crawled across wood and steel, ricocheting down the row. I wanted to run, but my legs rooted. Some sick gravity pulled me forward. "Who's there?" I whispered because silence felt worse. No answer. I turned to leave, to break whatever game I'd started. That was when I heard it, a scrape, a creak, and then rattle. One of the lids 3 shelves up trembled, no hand on it, no wind. Just the cedar lid shivering against its hinges like something underneath was pushing. The rattle stopped, leaving the warehouse suffocatingly still, except for one word that brushed my ear from nowhere, almost too faint to believe. Closer. I told myself I wasn't going to bring it up. Not the rattle. Not the way my name had skimmed my ear like breath from a mouth I couldn't see. Not the sense that the warehouse itself had turned its head toward me in the dark. Those details I folded into a mental envelope and licked it shut. Men like me keep things sealed until the glue fails. But dawn didn't wash the whisper out of my head. Coffee didn't blunt it. Scraping a razor across my jaw only made me more awake to it. By late afternoon, I'd talked myself into two beliefs that could not both be true. There was nothing to worry about, and the thing I was not worrying about was going to happen again. The security light over the lot came on before the sun had quite decided to leave. The moths were waiting for it like parishioners for a hymn. I parked under the cone of amber and watched the trees press against the fence. The hills around Ash Pines didn't just surround the building, they leaned in. It is possible, I told myself while the engine clicked cool, for mountains to have opinions about a warehouse. Fletcher was already at the front door. He has a way of appearing that never feels like he's been waiting long, only like he started existing when you stepped into the room, the line cook who finishes plating just as you round the corner. White shirt, sleeves rolled in the exact same way as yesterday, horn-rimmed glasses that made reflections into tiny mirrors. His smile hit warm and stopped halfway to his eyes. "You look like a man who spent a night with his thoughts and lost," he said. "Guess my thoughts are light sleepers," I said. "Then let's give them something to do." He led me down the short hall past the brochure stand with no brochures and the poster with the swaddled baby and the italic promise. The air changed at the warehouse door the way air changes at the flap of a tent. A different temperature, a different smell. Varnish, cedar, the suggestion of lemon cleaner, the ghost of wet cardboard. The fan's far-off hum laid a low line under it all like a bass note you feel in your bones more than you hear. He didn't go far. 4 racks in, he put his hands on a chest as if it were a dog that needed steadying. He looked up at me to be sure I was looking at him, not at whatever I was imagining, and nodded toward the lid. "Questions pile up in your eyes," Fletcher said. "Let me take a few off the heap." He unlatched the clasp with the businesslike affection of a man unlocking a door to his own shop. The hinges made a small, contented sound as the lid rose. He held it there, one palm against the wood as if keeping a skittish horse from bolting. Inside, plain cedar lining. Pale, smooth, a faint whorl running like smoke through the grain. The smell leaped up and pressed itself under my tongue. Pencil shavings, sun-warmed boards, the clean part of a lumber yard. On the underside of the lid, painted in looping, careful script, was a sentence I already knew from the lobby and from the way Fletcher said it yesterday, like a prayer he'd invented. "Every child deserves a hope chest. That's all. No folded baby blankets, no packs of diapers, no tiny socks clipped together with a pin, no Bible thinned to a wafer by being read too often. Only emptiness shaped like a promise and a sentence that landed in me with the weight of instruction." "Empty," I said, and it felt like I was replying to someone else in the room. "That's all they are," Fletcher said, soft like he was trying not to startle something. "Until they aren't." He lowered the lid as gently as men lower caskets they have paid for, the kind of gentleness that argues with gravity and intends to win. He slid the chest back into its place among its twins and cousins. Then he dusted his palms together as if he had been handling flour. "I didn't hire you to make you crazy," he said, still looking at the chest, not me. "I hired you to keep what's ours safe long enough that it becomes what it's meant to be." "What is it meant to be?" I asked, because the present tense of his verbs had stuck like a burr. "Hope is a shape you can carry," he said. but it's also the way you carry it. He looked at me then, a quick, bright glance that pinned me for a heartbeat and let me go. The difference between a box and a chest is a sentence on the inside. He took a breath that felt like he was choosing whether to be the kind version of himself or the version that had to be obeyed. The kind version won, but only barely. Rules, he said, not the paperwork ones, the kind that leave splinters if you slide your hand wrong. He held up a finger. One, don't open the crates, not on your own, not out of curiosity, not because you think you heard something. You won't like what you think you find, and what's inside won't like being found early. Second finger. 2, don't touch the freezer. He let that hang long enough for me to ask the question I was always going to ask. Because it's broken. Because it doesn't like being opened. I laughed and hated myself for it. Things don't like. Most things don't, he said. Some do. Third finger. 3, wear the headphones, always. I don't care if the fans whisper like they're trying not to wake a baby. I don't care if the pads make your ears sweat. I don't care if you'd rather hear your own thoughts ring inside your skull. Protect your head. Your head is where your whole life happens to you. What's worse than a ringing headache? I said, trying to find the joke in it, trying to make him reassure me. Learning which noises you shouldn't have heard, he said, and smiled again, the polite, public smile, the one he could put on a brochure if we ever had brochures. He clapped my shoulder once, a punctuation mark to end the briefing, and we walked deeper down the center aisle so he could gesture at the map taped to the office wall, and the laminated sheet on the clipboard, and the points on the dock doors where raccoons had tried to invent thumbs. He was talking, and I was listening, and also a part of me was holding the lid open in my mind to read the sentence again, because the sentence seemed to be reading me back. Every child deserves a hope chest. Why paint it inside, where you only see it once you've already opened the thing? Why not outside, for the world to nod at? Why tell the person holding the lid instead of the person looking at the lid from across the room? I wasn't sure if I was being moved by charity or manipulated by it, which is one of Charity's oldest tricks. When he left me at the office cube with the coffee maker that preferred flattery and the two-way radio with the duct-taped battery, and the stack of forms with my name spelled correctly as if the printer knew me, I stood for a minute with the headphones in both hands. They were heavier than they looked. The ear cups were cool against my palms. The braided cord coiled like a patient thing that could spring if you let it. I put them on. The world shrank to the sound of my own body, 1-2 of my heart, the small rasp of breath at the top of each inhale, the brush of shirt against shoulder with each step. The fans sank to a bed of distant foam I could barely feel. I started the rounds. Aisle 1. Snap the picture, glance at the shelf marker, glance at the baseline photo clipped under the plastic on the clipboard, check for misalignments, for crashes, for an absence where a presence should be. The smell of cedar rode the air like a memory you can't place at first, and then realize is your grandfather's house. The den with the paneling and the plastic runner over the carpet to keep the carpet that nobody liked good. Aisle 2. The tags hung from twine, names I'd never meet. Wilcox, Rivera, Mama T's Group, Church Lane. Some were written in steady cursive that made me think of women with strong hands and pin cushions. Some were block letters like kids make when they are mad. The handwriting made me feel like I was walking through the part of a town where mail carriers know who moved out and who died. Aisle 3. Fans overhead like silver suns that never deigned to spin. The dust on their cages was patterned like frost. I imagined someone wiping a finger there and tasting it and learning nothing. Aisle 4. I slowed so that the beat of my heart didn't bump into the steps of my feet. The row seemed longer today, a trick of convergence, a math problem on a chalkboard about lines that meet where you can't reach. I snapped the picture, and in the flare of the flash the cedar went white for a second, and when my sight came back, the lid seemed to have different expressions. You think the human brain will only make faces out of clouds and knots in wood if invited. The human brain attends to its own invitations. I kept moving because stopping meant thinking and thinking meant remembering. And remembering meant that garage when I was 8, and the yellow toy trunk with the astronaut stickers, and how I held the lid and let it rest against the back of my head like a hand. I had whispered in that trunk like someone listens on the other side. I had believed the listening was the point, not the answering. And yet last night something had answered. I told myself that believing it was my mistake. Aisle 5. The office cube with its tired blinds was a lighthouse for nobody. The dorm fridge's magnet letters still said "Feel freer." The taped handle on the chest freezer looked more blue than it had yesterday, the kind of blue that comes from other people's fingers. I drifted toward the freezer without deciding to. "Don't touch the freezer," Fletcher had said, in the tone of voice the children's sermon uses when it tells you the lion won't hurt you if you keep your voice down. It was a standard model, white dulled to cream by years, the corners dinged, the top scratched by something that had once tried to sit there. The strip of painter's tape stretched from lid to body and had "Do not open" scrawled in Sharpie, so hard the felt tip had feathered ink through the tape and into the plastic beneath. A magnet held a Polaroid. The colors had faded toward the same shade old lawns choose, but the scene was clear enough. Church picnic, paper plates with triangles of watermelon, a man with a sunburn holding tongs like weapons he had set down for the camera, a woman laughing with her whole face from behind 2 large sunglasses. In the background, on the grass, a rectangular silhouette with a curved lid raised like an alligator's snout. A chest open under a sky that didn't care. I leaned in without meaning to. People talk about hearing a hum in a freezer like hearing a heartbeat in your own ear pressed to a pillow. What I heard wasn't hum. It wasn't mechanical. You tell yourself it was air equalizing, or the compressor catching, or the insulation resigning itself. It sounded like someone breathing through a hand. I took a step back so fast my heels skidded, and the headphones knocked against the side of my head in a way that made my teeth feel it. The tape fluttered for a second, as if exhaling. I put my hand in the air in front of me like a person puts a hand out for a dog they don't want to surprise. I walked away without turning my back on it until the shelves hid it from me. Aisle 6. I told myself I was being dramatic and wrote "freezer area clear" on the line because the line was there to be written on. The varnish smell thickened. The headphones made my ears hot. A drop of sweat ticked from the pad down the side of my neck, and I flinched like something had touched me on purpose. The scrape came soft, so soft I might have missed it if I'd left the headphones on for what they were for instead of using them to hear my own blood. It wasn't metal on metal. It was wood negotiating with steel. The kind of sound a dresser drawer makes when it decides to open because you only asked nicely. I swung the flashlight. The beam cut a silver lane through the warehouse dusk, found the rack, found the third shelf, found the chest that was not quite where it had been. It jutted out from the rack 3-4 inches, just enough that gravity had an opinion about it. The scrape line it had left behind was pale, like chalk drawn on a blackboard and wiped once. The floor was level. The shelf was level. I could feel level in the soles of my feet the way you feel a lie in conversation. My hand went to the handle before my head had a chance to plan. The metal was cool and had a slickness that might have been oil or fingerprints or the idea of salt. It resisted. For maybe half a second the chest acted like it didn't want to go where I wanted it. Then it slid back with a groan so polite it felt like sarcasm. In the quiet of my padded head, the groan became the door of my old toy trunk closing in the garage to keep the yelling out. I exhaled, the kind of breath you let out when a child who has been testing the edge of a porch step takes one step back. I told myself some combination of humidity and shelf flex, and my own hands had made a thing look like it had been done by itself. Above me, 2 shelves up, another chest slid 1 inch. It made the exact same scratch. I didn't touch it. I stepped away without looking away. You learn that with dogs and with men. Back up, keep your eyes, don't run. Don't manhandle them, Fletcher said, very near and very level, and I realized with irritation and relief that the man had the feet of a cat. One was out, I said. I put it back where it belonged. They don't like being shoved, he said. He reached out and placed his palm flat on the face of the rack, as if taking the temperature of the shelf itself. Nothing moved. He took his hand away, and the spot where his palm had been held an outline of dryness in the dew of varnish, like he had pressed his signature there. They don't like drafts. They don't like being crowded. They don't like the wrong kind of attention. They're boxes, I said, too fast, like speed would get me through the door before it closed. Boxes don't misbehave, he said. The line would have been funny in someone else's mouth. In his, it sounded like a man saying he owned the patent on a particular word. He didn't touch me, but he did that shoulder-lean men do when they want you to listen with your whole side. The lenses of his glasses caught the light so I couldn't see his pupils. People's eyes are the only part you can never replace with a better version. They only misbehave when they are hungry, Fletcher said. Hungry is one of those words that lives in your body. It doesn't sit politely in your head. My stomach flinched at the same time as my jaw. The headphones turned the syllables into a thing I felt against the pads. I opened my mouth to ask the obvious, and he tilted his head a fraction and didn't let me. Before you say something you'll wish you didn't hear yourself say, he murmured. Remember what I asked you in the office about being a nurturing man. He adjusted his glasses with his ring finger, a small, delicate gesture that meant he was choosing how much to tell me by measuring it in teaspoons. Hungry things don't need a lecture. Hungry things need care. Care like they are babies, I said, because the sentence under the lid had decided to crawl into my throat and move my tongue for me. Care like they deserve to be more than the worst version of themselves, he said. Care like they can learn. I thought these were empty, I said, not because I believed it anymore, but because it was the last sentence I knew how to say in the language I had arrived here with. Empty until a family makes them into something else, he said, and smiled. It was the smile I had given to customers when I worked the returns desk at Walmart. We both know how this ends, but I'll let you feel dignified about getting there. If you hear something you think is the opposite of empty, remember your own head is a container too. He turned to go. He always turned to go at the point where what I wanted to argue with had grown arms. He took 3 steps, and the warehouse swallowed the sound of his soles, the way some rooms learn your weight and make allowances for it. I stood looking up at the rack like a tourist at a monument everyone else knows the history of. The varnish smell had gathered and hung in the air like breath. My hands had made fists around nothing. I opened them, and the sound the skin made against itself sounded too loud even inside my headphones. A part of my brain wanted to reach again and push all the chests back into perfect alignment, to tidy what all at once felt messy in a way tidying could not fix. A different part of my brain, the part that knew not to jam a stick through a chain-link fence that had a dog behind it, wanted to leave the aisle and not come back until daylight. I compromised the way people do with themselves. I took one picture with the company phone, the flash fluttered, the afterimage wrote lines and circles across my sight, and I walked past the office cube where the blinds held their slant like a person holding their breath, past the freezer, which I did not look at but saw anyhow the way you always see the thing you're not looking at, past the pallet jack parked nosing like a horse that knows where its stall is, past the corner where the floor had a scuff I hadn't noticed earlier, an arc where something heavy had pivoted or been pivoted, light and fresh like it wanted to be noticed. I made a full circuit and wrote down the times in the log. I wrote them slow, the way you do when you think your handwriting will be read later by someone you want to think well of you. I checked the dock doors, the walk-in, the alarm panel that had a cover over it like a thermostat because people can't keep their hands off a button. The night outside pressed its face to the loading bay windows. If you do this long enough, you can tell when a storm is taking attendance even without the app on your phone. When I came back to aisle 6, the chest I had slid into place was still where I'd left it. The chest 2 shelves up had not moved again. I looked not directly at them but at the seam where the rack met the floor. The seam seemed wider, which is a sentence that means nothing to anyone who wasn't there. I stood very still. The fans hummed the way they hummed when they didn't. The moths battered the sodium light outside, the sound traveling like the idea of rain. Somewhere high in the rafters, a ticking took a breath and chose not to happen. In the kind of quiet that makes your scalp know it's attached to you, a whisper rose. It wasn't like last night, when my name had brushed my ear as if spoken by someone who knew exactly where I was soft. This one came up through the structure, the way heat comes up in old houses through vents. Hungry, it said, not as a word made of letters but as a shape made of need. Hungry, with the throat left in it. Hungry, like a mouth that hadn't learned yet how to make language but had learned how to be fed. I am not proud of the sound I made. It was small and it belonged to a child. The headphones saved it for me so I could hear it and judge it later. Behind me, Fletcher said, "Good," in exactly the voice you use when a student does not touch the stove. He had come back without footsteps again. He stood close enough that if I turned I would count the thread mends in his sleeve. "They'll settle," he said, like he was describing a house as it warms for the winter. "You do the rounds, you keep the camera honest, you don't open what isn't yours to open, you don't ask a freezer for anything, and you feed what needs feeding when it's time." "What does that mean?" I asked. "Feed with what?" He tapped the ear cup of my headphones with a knuckle so gently it didn't make a sound. "With the right noise." He took a half step and looked up into the rack as if about to deliver a sermon to wood. He didn't speak. Or if he did, he spoke in a language my human ears didn't catch. The chest 2 shelves up slid back the inch it had claimed. The scrape was the quietest of all the sounds I'd heard that night, and it made something relax in the hinges of my knees that I hadn't realized I'd locked. Fletcher turned his head so I could see his mouth. He did not stop smiling. He just stopped showing his teeth. "They only misbehave when they're hungry," he said. "Keep them full, and you'll be amazed who they can learn to be." The fan's hum did not change. The varnish did not sweeten or sour. The moths outside kept dying under the light they wanted. Fletcher walked away the way good teachers leave a room, before you can thank them for making you more afraid than you were. I watched the aisle the way you watch the body of someone you love, prepared to swear nothing had changed when everything had. And when I finally moved, when I wrote the hour in the book, and the hour put its hands on my shoulders and turned me toward the next line, the whisper that found me did not say my name. It said nothing, which is worse. It let Fletcher's sentence live in my head where hunger lives when you've eaten recently and can't explain why you still want. They only misbehave when they are hungry. The storm had been in the weather reports all week. Severe thunderstorms possible, the kind of polite warning local stations repeat every spring until people stop listening. By Thursday night, the air itself had that metallic edge you only get when the clouds are preparing something mean. The warehouse groaned as the wind pressed against the siding. Out on County Road 19, tree branches scratched power lines like they were striking matches. I had my headphones on, the industrial pad sweating my ears, the bass hum of the fans a steady background line. Then, without warning, everything died. The lights clicked out in a single instant, leaving me in a void so absolute it felt like the air itself had vanished. The fans wound down in eerie unison, their voices dying into silence. The only sound left was the storm pounding against the roof. I froze, flashlight still on my belt, too shocked to reach for it. The warehouse had always been loud in its own way, buzzing lights, low fan hum, my own breathing caught and softened by the pads. Now there was nothing, and in that nothing I heard the warehouse breathe back. The varnish smell came first, stronger without the fans moving air, but beneath it, sharp and chemical like ammonia cutting through a janitor's closet. I pulled the headphones halfway off as if exposing my ears would help me breathe. The scent deepened. Rot. Not garbage, not food left out. Older, wetter. It clung to the back of my tongue until I gagged. I fumbled for the flashlight, my hand suddenly clumsy, and clicked it on. The beam cut a thin tunnel through the dark, trembling as my grip shook. The racks loomed around me, thousands of cedar chests lined up like pews in a church where the sermon had already begun, and the smell kept thickening. I pulled my shirt up over my nose, but the fabric only trapped it closer. It was like standing over an open grave that someone had filled with bleach before covering. That was when I heard it, a low creak, then another, wood under strain, hinges flexing. I swung the flashlight. The first chest rocked on its shelf, slow at first like it was testing the straps holding it down, then harder, thumping against the steel rack with enough force to rattle dust loose. Another joined, then another. The whole row began to sway in rhythm, lids straining against their latches, cellophane wrapping stretching with a plasticky whine. I backed up, light darting from rack to rack. Everywhere chests were moving, shuddering against restraints, jerking forward like something inside was pushing with both fists. The sound of wood slamming steel rose until it was deafening, like 100 fists pounding doors at once. The straps tightened. Some snapped. The noise became unbearable, a staccato roar of cracking wood, rattling lids, and that suffocating storm breath smell. I stumbled back toward the main aisle, flashlight beam jerking wildly, and that was when one of the chests gave up the fight. The strap broke with a gunshot snap. The chest pitched forward, toppled from its shelf, and hit the concrete floor hard enough to splinter. The lid flew open. The cedar cracked along the seam. Something spilled out. At first I thought it was water, thin, shining liquid that pooled fast, carrying a smell of overripe fruit under the ammonia. Then the light caught something pale rising through the wet. A hand. Not wooden, not painted. Flesh, the size of a child's but wrong. Translucent like glass, veins showing blue beneath the skin. Fingers tipped with faint, curved claws that tapped against the floor in twitchy, searching motions. I staggered backward while rising in my throat. The hand curled once, twice, like it was testing its own strength, then went still. The liquid spread around it, dark and oily in the flashlight beam. My breath roared in my own ears. The silence after the crash was somehow worse than the pounding storm. Then the whispers began. At first it was one voice, soft and desperate, then another overlapping it, then dozens rising from every direction, seeping from the rows of sealed chests. Not words at first, just sounds like children talking through water. Then the syllables sharpened. Mother. It came from the fallen chest. It came from the strapped one still rocking. It came from the farthest corners of the warehouse. Whispered, moaned, pleaded in 100 tones at once. Mother. The chorus built until the storm outside was drowned in it. My flashlight shook in my hand, beams scattering as my knees locked. Every chest around me shuddered in sympathy, straining against its bonds. And all together, louder, insistent, the voices cried out. Mother. The warehouse made the word into weather. Mother. It shivered up the racks and shook dust from the rafters. It raced along the steel like static and bounced off the concrete until my bones felt hollow enough to carry it. If sound could slap, that one did. My flashlight threw a pale funnel down the aisle, and every lid within it trembled as if the light itself made them afraid. I didn't decide to run. My legs just did it, the way a hand flinches from a burner before your brain agrees. I shouldered through the push-bar door to the loading bay and slammed out into the night air that hit my lungs like cold water. The storm had a body now. Rain came sideways in sheets that stung my cheeks and soaked my shirt in one stab of time. The security light over the lot jittered, buzzing under the assault of moths and water. Beyond its cone of amber, the world was a moving gray, trees thrashing black against black, gravel shining like fish scales, the fence bowing toward the road as if the wind had taken it by the elbows. I bolted for my car and made it 10 steps. Then I stopped because the road wasn't a road anymore. It moved. At first my brain put it down to floodwater. County Road 19 is famous for that. The ditch swells, the culvert coughs up a brown tongue, and the shoulders go first. But floods surge and slump in waves. They wobble around obstacles. This was motion with intention. A low, thick mass crawled across the gravel like a slow heave of earth. Mud, leaves, branches, yes, but wrong. The whole mess wrinkled, shivered, regrouped. And in the sweep of the security light, for one clean second, I saw it rotate like a head turning, and 2 wet black eyes opened in the slick. I forgot how to breathe. The mudslide blinked. When it did, the top layer sloughed and slid. A mat of grass peeled back to reveal scales underneath. Not the smooth, pretty fantasy kind you see in tattoo flash sheets. These had a chipped, chalky quality, pale as plaster under paint. They overlapped in plates that glistened when the rain hit, then dulled again like a frog's back brought up from the creek. Lightning stitched a white scar through the clouds, and thunder punched the lot like a fist. The thing gathered itself, rising on the strength of something more than soil. It wasn't as tall as the building, but that didn't matter. Things that can press metal like cotton don't need height to make you feel small. It lunged, not fast, but with a purpose that made speed irrelevant. and the lot shuddered under the weight of its arrival. Behind me, through the loading bay door I'd left gaping, the chorus of "Mother" swelled, hundreds of throats in wood boxes asking and ordering at the same time. The sound made the hair on my arms rise through the wet. I turned back toward the warehouse with the contradictory thought that inside might be worse, and the more practical one that inside came with doors that had locks and heavy things I could hide behind. My shin slammed the lip of the doorway as I scrambled in and fell hard onto my palm. The flashlight skittered away, clattering under a pallet of shrink-wrapped lids. Pain came a second later, bright and stupid. I fought the door with both hands, dragging it. The wind tried to keep it open. The hinge moaned. Somewhere to my left, something huge hit the outer wall, and the sheet metal buckled with a honk like a car horn being smothered. When the door finally gave, it did so all at once, swinging into the jam with a metallic bang that echoed through the emptiness like a gunshot. I threw the deadbolt and leaned my full weight against the cool metal, breathing like I'd been chased up 5 flights of stairs. Then the door pushed back. Not a person on the other side. Not the wind. Something heavy thumped it from outside, and the hollow skin of the warehouse thrummed. The bottom edge curled inward a finger's width. The bolt held, but the frame complained. A second blow followed, higher, and a vertical wrinkle bloomed across the steel as if pressed there by a giant thumb. A third hit, lower, snapped the threshold screws like little bones. On my right, the line of racks shivered. Straps pinged in the echo like plucked strings. Lids juddered against their catches until some popped up and slapped shut again under the strain. The smell in the air changed, too, stronger ammonia snapping at the sinuses, then something fruity sweet and gone bad underneath, like a trash can where the rinds hid under paper towels. "Mother," the warehouse pleaded. Some voices were so high they hardly existed. Some carried a gargle deeper than a person could manage. It made my stomach flip with the too fast recognition that I was hearing a crowd without faces. The door gave. Not all the way, not clean, just enough. The deadbolt tore through its housing with a squeal, and the slab of metal bowed inward like a lid being pried. The bottom edge hopped its screws, and the top hinge spit a fat screw that pinged and spun on the concrete at my feet. The door did not open. It imploded, reversing itself into a jagged V. What came through first was not a head or a hand. It was a smell, thick enough to feel on the tongue. Hot swamp breath, low tide and composted. Then a sound, deep and wet and somehow musical, a ribbed croak like a bullfrog magnified through a church organ's pipes. It came in pulses, tuned to something my chest wanted to match. The metal tore another 4 inches. Rain banded the hole, gushing into the warehouse in cold ropes. Through the gap, a shape shouldered forward. It had 5 claws on the visible limb, each the size of my forearm, ivory-stained like antique piano keys. They were not talons exactly. They curved, yes, but ended blunt, designed for pressure more than puncture, backhoe teeth. The limb sank into concrete like it found the rock's grain and parted it. A line ran up the limb where 2 plates met, and through that seam, a white tongue like a ribbon snake's extension slid out and tasted the air. It found me. That should not be a thing you can feel, but I did. A warm stripe of breath drew across my chest like someone blowing on a window to fog it. I took a step backward and hit the pallet with my heel, plastic chewing against the back of my calf. The limb withdrew. The hole went dark for half a breath. Then the door ceased to exist. The entire panel ripped free with a noise that will forever be the bass line under my nightmares and spiraled away into the storm. The opening was as wide as a truck now, ragged edges glittering with ripped screws and peeled paint. I saw it. Eyes first, one then shifts of light that implied another out of frame. Not snake eyes, not cat. Round pupils drowned in a rubbery brown-black, the kind you see in horses when they consider you. A ridge above the socket peeled back and settled, exposing more of the globe. Rain skittered across the eyeball like it was hood-waxed, beating and running but not wetting. The head rolled on a neck that wasn't a neck so much as a continuation, a submarine's conning tower covered in broken tile. A frill hung in tatters along its jawline, and the edges of the frill twitched as if tasting electricity. It extended the white tongue again. The tongue was the worst part, not because of what it did, but because of what it communicated. It wasn't a snarl or a bite. It was curiosity. It was the wet articulating instrument of an animal that solved the world by licking it. The tongue probed the air, slipped into the warehouse and brushed the pallet wrap. Static snapped. The beast flinched and then returned, more cautious, flower slow. It made a sound like a gator's bellow crushed into a bassoon note, and the chest straps all down the aisle vibrated in sympathy. "Mother," the rows answered, not one at a time but all at once, a crowd chant spreading from steel to steel. I found my flashlight under the lip of the pallet by muscle memory more than sight, yanked it free and snapped it on. The beam speared the white tongue and it recoiled, slapping wetly against the thing's own teeth if they were teeth. I took the chance, bolted left into the main artery between racks and ran. The warehouse is not a maze until you want it to be. Every aisle looks like the next, but you can convince yourself you know the recipe. 8 racks, an office cube, a dock, a door. In the strobing of lightning filtered through skylight panels, the place became a blackened white slideshow where each step forward landed in a different picture. I counted with my feet, my breath battering the earpads of my headphones from the inside, my heart banging like a fist on a bedroom door. The beast came in its own way, not fast like I said, but unstoppable. I heard it instead of seeing it. The concrete cracked under its weight with a crackle like ice shifting on a pond. Something metal screamed, and then the scream cut off in 2 blinks as the skeleton of the building adjusted to its new occupancy. I hit the office cube and bounced off the door jamb, scraping my shoulder on a screw head that stuck out like an exposed tooth. The handle slipped under my cold, wet hand and then grabbed. I fell into the little room and slammed it behind me as if that would help, even though the wall was drywall and the creature outside had just bent a building. 2 desks, one messy, one clean. A beige fax machine sulked on a file cabinet like it was ashamed of the time it was born. The pineapple magnet on the mini-fridge smiled its annoying little smile. On the desk without the paper drift sat a cheap, black, prepaid flip phone that wasn't there yesterday. The kind you buy at a gas station counter with a cash wad and a face that says you lost your real one. A piece of masking tape on the back had a number written in block letters. Fletcher. I didn't think, I grabbed it. I didn't have to dial. It began to ring in my hand before I even snapped it open. Not a truck reversing, not a bell. An ordinary ring, chip-synthesized happy. It cut right through the monster noises, through the thunder, through the chanting from the racks. The sound was so normal it made tears prick my eyes. I flipped it open and croaked, "Hello." "Daniel," Fletcher said, his voice so calm it made my knees want to lock out of spite. He sounded like a radio host at 3 a.m., introducing a jazz standard. "I'm sorry it came to this." "You think," I shouted, too loud in the little office, too loud in my own ears. What is it? It ripped the door off. Its words don't work at a certain size of fear, they rebel. What do I do? Where did you hide when you were a boy? He asked, like a school therapist leading me to my inner child. When your father broke the world with his voice, where were you safe? Are you kidding me? I said, and then before I could stop myself, the picture arrived complete. A yellow toy trunk with astronauts half peeled and a hinge that bit if you closed it too quick. My knees pressed into my ribs. The muffled sound of someone opening a fridge and closing it too hard in the kitchen. My own breath, a soft whistle in the dark. A chest, I said, and nearly laughed, the edge of hysterical. I hid in a chest. Good, he said. Do it again. I don't have one. I looked wildly around the office as if a perfect memory of a trunk would conjure its twin. The desks, the fridge, the file cabinet. The flip phone cord dangled out the back of the fax and trailed to a wall jack that probably didn't go anywhere. The freezer, Fletcher said. He told me not to touch it, and my brain played the warning like a chaperone clearing his throat at the dance. But my body had already decided. I slammed the phone between my shoulder and my ear, shoved the office door open again, and ran into the aisle. The beast had shuffled farther into the warehouse now. I didn't see it. I felt it the way you know the ocean is to your right even with your eyes closed because your skin tells you which side the wind comes from. A ridge of pressure moved down the left-hand rose as it shouldered along. Lids banged in a ripple behind it like applause for something you don't want to celebrate. Its wet croak shuddered down my back and made my spine want to crack itself like knuckles. The freezer waited where it always had, a dumb, dented white coffin with blue tape on its lip. I skidded to it, grabbed the handle where the tape was wrinkled from other hands and pulled. It didn't fight me. I don't know why I expected it to. The lid came up like a lazy eyelid, and a cold breath rolled out that smelled like condenser dust and the memory of casseroles. I tipped my shoulder and slid inside, phone and all, trying not to bang my shins against the inner rim. The lid fell toward my face and I caught it with the flat of my hand, then lowered it carefully. The blue tape stuck against the side with a sound like a bandage coming off skin. Darkness. In that dark, the chant of Mother went from a crowd sound to a pressure sound. Something my ribs felt the way they feel a hug. Outside, the beast's bellow rolled right and then left, shaking dust from somewhere high. Papers that had been tucked under a desk edge lifted and fluttered. A pen in a cup on the desk rolled and dropped to the floor with a plink. The freezer vibrated against my shoulder blades when the creature bumped the cube wall, then settled again with a neighing whine from the compressor that wasn't running. I realized two things at once. One, the freezer smelled more like Fletcher than like me. His detergent, that faint old book must that clung to his shirts, a whisper of citrus. It was impossible, and it was true. Your nose knows all the things your brain wants to argue with. Two, without the fans, without the white noise of the building, I could hear it think. Not words, not the way the chests did, but the mother thing had a rhythm, a music. It clicked softly inside itself, bone on bone maybe, and those clicks made patterns that made my scalp itch with recognition only because I didn't want to recognize it at all. Stay still, Fletcher said in my ear. I realized I'd been holding my breath and let it out as quietly as I could. She hasn't been socialized like the others. She's a wild one. I whispered, choking the sound as though it could squeeze through a screw hole. She's doing what she knows, Fletcher said. She heard her young calling. You stepped between. That was not on purpose, I said. I know, he said, and the tone of his voice did not match the words. It carried the soft, infuriating admiration adults use when a toddler does something obviously dangerous and obviously clever. Think of why the freezer felt safe when you were 8. It didn't, I said before I could stop myself. It was the trunk. The freezer is the lid above me flexed. Not all the way, just a little. A weight pressed it down from outside, a curious hand. The white tongue slid through the crack and tasted the air in a single cold lick across my forehead. I clamped both hands over my mouth so I didn't make the sound my throat insisted on. Tears squeezed out of my eyes and slid into my hair. The tongue withdrew. Then came the sniffing. She smelled the lid, the hinge, the seam all the way around. Each sniff was a dragged sandpaper sound, wetness across enamel, the click deep inside followed by a pause that could only be a brain doing math. When the sniff passed over the tape, it made a sticky sound like tongues and adhesive have always made at church potlucks when someone pulls the last square of a name tag off a shirt. The tape held. The lid held. My hands held. A second passed. A year passed. A laugh track of lifetimes passed. The weight lifted from the lid a fraction, then pressed again, harder, testing. The freezer creaked. The hinge complaint sent a silver fish of fear through my stomach as I pictured the lid coming up and that eye peering in, the whole world reduced to pupil. I could see myself like a snack inside a vending machine, stupid and rapt. Stay still, Fletcher breathed. Do nothing. Impossible instructions, but I did my best imitation. My body remembered 8 years old in a yellow trunk and made those muscles again. Outside, she croaked, a sound like a diesel engine that hadn't decided whether to start. Her claw scraped concrete near my head, and dust sifted down through the lid seemed to pepper my cheeks. Something slid across the top of the freezer and thumped to the floor, paper, a clipboard, the rolling crash of a chair leg. She doesn't know you're a nurturer yet, Fletcher said. She only knows you're between her and what she thinks she's lost. I'm not, I started, and then didn't finish because I didn't know how to complete the sentence without making a promise I might break. What do I do if she? Nothing, he said again. Let her choose to leave. Leave for where? For the voice. As if on cue, the warehouse answered itself. The chant of mother swelled, then focused like the crowd had wheeled to point all their faces in one direction. The beast bellowed, low and long, and something heavy dragged over the concrete away from the cube. The pressure slackened at my side. The freezer stopped trembling. My breath returned with a dizzy sucking that made black snow pop around the edges of my vision. I lay in the dark and counted. When I got to 40, something bumped the freezer again, lightly, the way a cat rubs its side against your shin to mark you with scent on its way to the door. The thing's heat stuck to the metal and then bled away. The chorus faded, not to silence but to a distance. I imagined her long body sluicing down an aisle like a clot dissolving. Racks righted behind her, straps stilled. Lids dropped shut. The rain outside had found a rhythm that wasn't war so much as work. Lightning went from relentless to occasional. Thunder answered in a considerate way. An old man clears his throat. "Daniel," Fletcher said, "you still with me?" "Yes," I said, and the word came out as a thin paper thing that didn't tell the truth. "Good," he said. "This part of the county is prone to floods." He said it the way people say the sun sets in the west when they want to change the subject gently. "Insurance likes that story." "Insurance," I repeated. "She was looking for the broken one," he said. "The chest, the one you saw. You did right by hiding. You'd have made it worse if you tried to be brave in the way men misunderstand brave." I didn't answer. I pressed my fingertips to my forehead where the tongue had traced me. The The skin there felt colder than the rest, clean in a way soap never manages. "Stay put until the wind stops pretending to be a god," he said. "Then come out. We'll talk in the morning." The line clicked. He didn't give me the chance to ask any of the questions that poured in like floodwater through a door you forgot to sandbag. I lay there in the not cold of a dead freezer with the smell of his shirts around me and tried to feel my own edges. I counted again, past 40 this time, all the way to 300, and at 212 the freezer lid ticked as it relaxed, and I finally let my breath expand enough to hurt. When I pushed the lid an inch with my knuckles and peered out into the black of the office, the first thing my eyes found was the cheap flip phone face down on the floor where it had slid from my shoulder. Its little screen still glowed a faint green. The clock read 3:06. The battery icon showed 3 bars. The word Fletcher sat neat as a label at the top. I reached for it. Before my fingers touched the plastic, the phone buzzed once, twice, then began to ring in my hand again. Normal, chip, polite. In the distance, as if to harmonize with it, the warehouse exhaled a soft, tired mother like a baby saying its first real syllable in its sleep. I flipped the phone open. I didn't say hello. "Time to come out," Fletcher said, cheerful now as though we were finishing a shift at a diner and splitting tips. "Let's get the door boarded, Daniel. I'll bring coffee. Mango yogurt later if you want it." Something huge dragged itself across the loading bay, away from us both, with the sound of wet canvas pulled over gravel. The rain eased. The security light buzzed to itself. Somewhere deep, a fan, unpowered but free, spun a quarter turn like a prayer wheel and went still. I climbed out of the freezer, knees shaking in a way that would embarrass me tomorrow and made no impression on me tonight. I held the phone like a talisman. The earpiece crackled with Fletcher's steady breath. "Good man," he said. "We'll make a handler of you yet." I stepped into the aisle and tried to believe him. Outside, County Road 19 drained itself of its visitor and the creek found its banks again. The warehouse was not empty and never had been. My pocket vibrated. The phone's backlight brightened. And then, absurdly, like it had been placed there by an adult for a child who needed a script for what to do next, it rang in my hand, insistent and ordinary. I put it to my ear. "Daniel," Fletcher said, "listen carefully." The phone rang in my hands with that ordinary, off-the-shelf ringtone that shouldn't have been able to cut through the storm but did. I snapped it open, and Fletcher's voice came through calm, measured, the same tone he might use if he were standing across a counter from me instead of wherever the hell he really was. "Think, Daniel," he said. "Where were you safe as a boy?" My pulse hammered in my throat. "What, are you kidding me? There's a thing out here, it tore the doors." "Daniel," he repeated, firmer now. "Don't waste breath naming it. Where were you safe?" And like a hammer blow, memory rose, 8 years old, shoved into a yellow toy trunk with astronaut stickers peeling off, my father's shouting muffled to a dull thunder. The cedar smell, the dark, the tightness, the sense that I'd hidden myself in something that could keep me. "In the chest," I whispered. "Good," Fletcher said. "Do it again, but this time think bigger." My flashlight beam jittered as I staggered through the aisles. Every chest around me was alive with the chant, "Mother, mother, mother," the wood itself rattling like teeth. The creature had forced half its bulk into the warehouse. Its claws gouged ruts into the concrete as it hauled itself forward, each scrape a shriek of stone. Its split tongue lashed through the air, tasting, questing. I ran toward the one thing Fletcher had told me never to touch, the freezer. It sat squat and dented in its corner, the strip of blue tape fluttering in the draft like a useless prayer. The Sharpie warning, "Do not open," gleamed in the lightning strobing through the cracked skylights. The phone stayed at my ear. Fletcher's voice pressed in, steady as heartbeat. "Get in, now." I tore the tape, yanked the lid. It squealed like an old hinge, the sound loud enough to betray me to anything listening. Cold, stale air rolled out, metallic like long-dead ice. I shoved the phone into my shirt pocket, heaved myself over the rim, and curled into the coffin-like dark. The lid thudded shut above me, sealing me in with the smell of dust, citrus detergent, and faint mildew. It was a smell I knew, the smell of Fletcher. The warehouse thundered with movement. The creature bellowed, a wet, croaking roar that made the freezer walls tremble against my shoulders. Its claws cracked concrete, pacing, circling. Then came the sound I dreaded, a slow drag across the lid, wood on metal except heavier. A probing weight settled above me. The freezer flexed, and then wetness. The split tongue slithered through the seam. It hissed against the cold steel, then slid farther in, questing, tasting. The forked ends curled like fingers. One brushed my forehead, clammy alien. I clamped my teeth into my own fist to choke the sound rising in my throat. The tongue lingered, drew across the lid, snaked down the hinge. I could hear it more than feel it, a rasping, slimy sound like wet rope pulled through a pipe. It paused, drew back. The freezer rocked as the weight shifted away. I waited, lungs burning, counting seconds that dragged like hours. A sound followed, an inhale, not mine, not the storm's. The creature was smelling, searching. Then an exhale that shuddered through the freezer walls, and silence. The freezer smelled stronger now, Fletcher's smell. Detergent, starch, faint lemon. I realized with a jolt of clarity, the thing hadn't retreated because of me. It had retreated because it smelled him. Fletcher had been here before. The creature hissed low, frustrated, and withdrew. Its body scraped against the racks as it hauled itself back. The chorus of Mother dimmed, as if soothed by her presence. For a heartbeat, I thought I was safe. Then the freezer lurched. The creature's tail, or maybe just its passing weight, had clipped it. My world tilted. I slammed sideways into the cold wall, shoulder first, as the box tipped. The lid banged open. A shaft of lightning flashed across my eyes. The freezer crashed to the floor with an explosion of sound and pain. My head struck metal. The world folded in. And just before the black took me, muffled by storm and distance, I heard the chorus rise again. One word stretched across every voice like the tearing of the sky. Mother. It was 2 days before Fletcher called me again. Not the night after the storm, not even the morning after, when the county crews were already pretending the twisted doors were just flood damage. 2 days of silence, in which my thoughts wandered the way weeds do when no one's tending the yard. Then, casually, he told me to meet him at the park. The park was half an acre of tired grass and paint-chipped swings, a place where teenagers smoked after dark and old men fed bread to ducks that didn't want it. I found Fletcher on a bench beneath an oak that had dropped half its acorns early. He wasn't rattled. He wasn't worried. He wasn't even armed. He was eating yogurt. Mango yogurt, the bright orange kind you buy in 4-packs at the grocery store, with foil lids that always tear crooked. He had a plastic spoon, and each bite was slow, unbothered, like we were neighbors catching up after church. "Sit, Daniel," he said, patting the bench with the hand not holding the cup. "It's a good morning." I sat. My body didn't want to, but something about the calm he carried made refusal feel impossible. For a while, the only sounds were the spoon scraping plastic and the distant crack of a little league bat. I wanted to scream at him, demand answers, shake him until something spilled out. Instead, I heard myself ask, "What was it?" He licked yogurt from the spoon, smiled faintly. "We call them whelps." The word stuck in my ear like a burr. "Whelps," I repeated. He nodded. "Children of a sort, not human, not entirely beast, half potential, half hunger. They're not born the way you and I were. They're grown into shape, shaped by where they are raised, who they bond with." My stomach turned. "You're saying those chests—" "Socialization," Fletcher said lightly, as though he were describing dog training. "Give a whelp to a family young enough, they learn, they cling, they become guardians, companions, maybe even friends. Deny them that, you saw what the wild ones become." The memory of the reptilian bulk tearing through steel made me grip the bench until my knuckles ached. "And you send them out like toys?" I asked. "Not toys, hope chests." He gestured with his spoon. "Every child deserves one. Every whelp deserves a chance to love. That's the balance." He finished the last spoonful, set the empty cup neatly beside him, and began rubbing his fingertips together. It was a small, idle gesture, like a man brushing crumbs away, but the sound was wrong. Not skin on skin, not the faint rasp of dry hands, bone, sanded bone, rough on rough. The sound crawled up my spine and made my scalp itch. Fletcher smiled as though he hadn't noticed, but his eyes held me in place, pale reflections behind the horn rims. "Socialization isn't just for them, Daniel," he said softly. "It's for us, to remind us we're more than our hunger too." I swallowed hard. "Why are you telling me this?" He leaned closer, his breath smelling faintly of mango and coffee. "Because you need to understand what you are." My chest tightened. "What I am." He tapped his bone-sanded fingers against my wrist, the sound clicking sharp. "I raised you once too, Daniel," he whispered. "The park sounds faded. The kids, the ducks, the bats, all gone. Just that sentence echoing in my skull over and over until it didn't feel like words anymore. I raised you once too. Sleep had abandoned me. Even in my own apartment, miles from ash pines, I kept half waiting for the rattle of wood against steel, the whisper of mother under the floorboards. Fletcher's words at the park wouldn't stop echoing. I raised you once too, Daniel. I told myself it was a trick, one more manipulation to keep me tethered. But the more I dug through the fog of memory, the less certain I became. So I went back to the warehouse on my day off. Not during shift, not on schedule. I still had the spare keys Fletcher had forgotten to take from me. The county had taped a flood hazard sign across the loading dock, but the yellow tape sagged. Nobody was guarding the place. Inside, the air carried the stale sting of chemicals, but quieter now. Too quiet. The fans were off. I didn't head to the aisles. Instead, I went to the office cube, slid open the filing cabinet Fletcher never touched when I was around, and started pulling folders. They were labeled by year. 1996, 2002, 2010. Distribution records. Every folder contained forms, family names, addresses, signatures, all listed as recipients of the Little Miracle Chest or Hope Chest Initiative. But the margins were full of notes in a hand I recognized, Fletcher's looping cursive. Bonded early, responsive to name. Resistance to discipline, withdrew chest. Successful integration, mimic pattern stable. The deeper I flipped, the more my stomach sank. I found testimonials clipped from letters, probably once meant as PR material. Our daughter insists her hope chest whispers to her at night. She says it tells her bedtime stories. Adorable, right? Our boy stopped being afraid of the dark. He says his chest keeps watch, even calls it Uncle Tom. At first we thought it was an imaginary friend, but sometimes we hear the voice too when the house is quiet. My hand shook as I read the last one. We woke one morning and she was gone. The chest was empty, lid open. Please contact us. The note in Fletcher's handwriting below it, unstable placement, chalked to hunger, recovered late, socialization failed. My pulse thudded in my ears. These weren't donations, they were experiments. Families weren't recipients, they were hosts. And the children, collateral. The back office had a row of dusty VHS tapes labeled Security LOG. I found an old player shoved under a desk, plugged it into a monitor, and pressed play. The grainy footage showed living rooms, nurseries, kitchens. Not the warehouse, these were homes. At first, nothing strange, parents cooking, children opening the cedar chests, pulling out toys. Then the oddities crept in. A child asleep in bed, the chest in the corner. The lid eased open by itself. Something pale uncurled inside. The static fuzzed, but I caught the impression of fingers pressing against the edge, followed by a small, hunched figure climbing out. The child stirred, smiled, whispered something. The figure whispered back. Next tape, a birthday party, parents chatting while kids tore through wrapping paper. The hope chest sat in the corner. When the cake arrived, one extra child clapped along. Nobody seemed to notice the stranger. Freeze frame, its smile was too wide. Another tape, a father working at a desk. His daughter tugged his sleeve, asking him something. He nodded absently, but she wasn't tugging him. She was tugging a copy. A figure behind him, mimicking his movements a split second late, lips mouthing the same words. The hairs on my arms rose. These weren't just creatures. They were practicing, learning how to be us. I ejected one tape and slid in another, fingers numb. Static cleared to show a dim bedroom. A small boy huddled in bed, a flashlight under his chin. His lips moved as he whispered into the dark. The camera angle caught the hope chest beside him. Its lid was propped open. A voice answered. Not loud, not clear, but the sound drilled into me like a splinter under the nail. It wasn't the boy's. It wasn't his parents'. It was mine. The whispering voice from my childhood, the one I'd convinced myself was imagination, filled the speakers. Closer, Daniel, closer. I staggered back from the monitor, heart pounding so hard the tapes rattled in their case. The child on the screen turned his head toward the camera, toward me. And I knew him. It was me. I stole the chest. That's not how I told it to myself when I slid it off the lower rack and set it on the dolly, but there isn't a softer verb that fits. I peeled a length of pallet wrap from a roll, cocooned the cedar curve until the plastic shone, and signed my own name on the after-hours log with a note that was true in every sense except the one that mattered. Community placement, overnight trial. There wasn't a community placement form in the binder. There would be, one day, if Fletcher and his network kept at this. History loves a tidy file. I was making do with a line and a lie, and the lie made my hands shake even as it steadied my breathing. I could have taken it anywhere. I could have driven to the edge of the county and pushed it into the river to see if the water made it sing. I could have parked it in a church vestibule and watched which parishioner claimed it. Instead, I drove to a house with a chain-link fence and a plastic tricycle on its side in the yard. Because there are experiments you can't run in a lab, and there are questions you can't answer any way but the hard way. Nora lived in a ranch with a metal awning that clicked when rain cooled it. We had known each other long before Maya and the double-length arguments that came with her. Nora and I had been the kind of teenagers who thought a $2 matinee could cure a hard week. We broke up because we were 19 and thought pain meant fate was paying attention. Years later, we kept a cautious peace that didn't ask too many questions about whether the timing had ever been right. She opened the door with the chain still on. Her hair was up in a knot that had given up on being neat halfway through the day. The TV wasn't loud, which meant her boy wasn't sleeping yet. The hour had made dregs of parents everywhere. "Daniel," she said, as if the word was a coin she found in a pocket she'd already checked. Her eyes dropped from my face to the dolly, to the wood, to the way I had wrapped it, and she narrowed them. "What's that?" "A favor," I said. "A test. A bad idea that might help." "You led with bad idea, so we're already 2 steps ahead of most men. I need you to trust me for maybe an hour." "Trust," she said, and slid the chain. The way she said it made it sound like a language she could read but didn't speak. "If my kid wakes up and screams, you're the one who gets him back down." "That's the plan," I said, and the part of me that keeps score flinched because now there was a plan. We wrestled the chest up the short walk and over the threshold. Even under plastic you could smell cedar, that pencil shaving's brightness that below a certain age means school, and above a certain age means hope. I set it against the far wall of the living room, beneath a framed print of a lighthouse that had never seen our county's creek. The motto on the inside of the lid lived in my head like a glow-in-the-dark sticker: "Every child deserves a hope chest." I didn't open it. I didn't need to read it to feel read by it. "Cal's not asleep," Nora said, wiping her hands on a dish towel that had never been near a dish. "He's in that mood where everything's the end of the world and also nothing matters." "How old is he now?" 5 going on the part of 6 that thinks it knows about 9. Looked at the chest again. "You going to explain what's in the box, or are we doing the part where a man says don't worry and the woman ignores her instincts?" "Nothing's in it," I said. I let the sentence sit there so long it went stale. "At least nothing you can clamp in your hand. It's a program, socialization. Fletcher says the chests work better when they learn families." "Learn families," she repeated, like I'd just told her the moon had to study for its phases. "Is there a reason you brought that thing into my living room instead of the place you, what is it, guard, worship, babysit?" "Because I don't trust them," I said, "and I don't trust me until I see it for myself." From down the hall came the telltale sound of a pre-kindergarten meltdown winding up, the sharp inhale before the siren. A cup hit carpet. A small heel kicked a door in 4 helpless thumps. Nora closed her eyes like a churchgoer who just remembered the line they forgot to pray. "Screen time's over," she said. "I tried negotiation." He countered with an appeal to the Supreme Court. The court declined to hear oral arguments. "Let me," I said. "You sure?" "No," I said, and that got a laugh out of her, which I hadn't planned but took anyway. I slipped down the hall to the boys' room, which smelled like the rotation of any kid's life. Clay and shampoo, and the sour sweet of apple juice that missed its mouth. A night light shaped like a cartoon rocket lit the carpet in a blue that wanted to be brave. Posters of dinosaurs were peeling at the corners where little fingers had worried them. Cal was on his bed on his knees, fists jammed in his eyes, shoulders peaked and rigid with the kind of injustice only 5-year-olds and betrayed saints can sustain. He didn't know me well enough to edit himself, which is a kind of mercy. He didn't stop screaming when I came in, he just changed the words. "I want it," he wailed. "I want it back." "What's it?" I said, soft as you can without disappearing. "The pad," he said, and sobbed the word like syllables were heavy. "I want to finish the level." "I know about levels," I said. "They'll rot your brain in the best way." I sat on the floor back to the wall and put a little space between us because kids can smell need as much as dogs can. "Do you know about chests?" He sniffed, skeptical, because that's a 5-year-old's job. For pirates. For hope, I said. The boy hiccuped. Hope is a church word. Only because churches got there first, I said. It belongs to people who try. From the living room came a sound I would have sworn I was ready for. The chest knocked. Not a slide, not a scrape. A neighborly knock on wood, once, twice, as if to suggest it knew the custom but not the nuance. Cal lifted his head so fast his hair left a shadow behind. "Who's that?" he whispered. "An imaginary friend," I said, because I had no business telling the truth. He slid off the bed, sticky feet smacking carpet, and padded into the hall before I could stop him. I followed at grown-up speed, trying to look casual while calibrating the distances between the boy and the chest in my own hand. In the living room, the plastic-wrapped lid had fogged near the seam, like breath had found a way out of wood. Nora stood with her arms folded high. "If that thing so much as creaks at my kid, I'm launching it into the yard." "It creaked," I said. "I heard it." Cal went straight toward the chest as if it had a riptide. He put both hands on the plastic and leaned his ear to it. Somewhere in the room, a toy truck rolled off the couch and hit the area rug, and nobody flinched because there are sounds a house knows it can ignore. "Can I open it?" he asked. "No," Nora and I said at exactly the same time, too sharply. His face folded the way faces fold before tears come back for second round. "I'll tell you a story," I said, and heard my own voice try on a costume. "But only if you help me." "How?" he said, suspicious of adult bargains. "By listening as hard as anybody ever listened," I said. "Listening is work. If you do it right, your ears get tired. You're 5, you're strong enough for it." He put his ear again to the plastic like a mechanic listening to a hood. I crouched on the other side, near enough to cover the handle if the lid went rogue with ideas. "What story?" he said. "About a boy who was good at being mad," I said. "He could be mad louder and longer than anybody, and that was his superpower." Nora's mouth twitched, betraying an involuntary smile. Cal considered me like an attorney considers a witness. "But the boy's other superpower was how he could make quiet," I said. "Not the quiet where you're in trouble, the kind where everything in the room likes you for helping." He frowned because that's a tricky kind of quiet. "How?" "You put a blanket on your words and a pillow on your feet," I said, and then, because lying to a 5-year-old is dangerous business, and because the chest had knocked twice more, gently, "and you listen for a thank you." We sat there with our heads tilted toward wood and rapped like people at a wall waiting to hear if there's anybody on the other side. I could hear the storm that wasn't there anymore in my memory, and the lever click of my father's lighter before a cigarette, and my own breath like a train farther off than it used to be. The chest knocked back, not hard, a polite little tap the way a bird might ask to be let out of a house it entered by accident. Cal's spine straightened as if something inside it had remembered to be a mast. "Did you hear it?" he whisper-yelled. "I did," I said. He looked at me like he had decided to move me up 2 ranks in his army. "What's its name?" "You can tell me," I said, "because that's what you say when you want a kid to make the magic themselves." He pressed his lips to the plastic where the lid met the body and whispered, "Hi," like he was talking into the mouth of a cave. Back in my chest, something old welcomed the shape of that word. The plastic fogged again and stayed fogged where he'd spoken. The wrap creaked. Underneath, wood shifted, only the tiny give of a board settling in its own shape but with intent. Then Cal did the thing that, if fate has a filing system, went into the folder labeled Turning Point. He went and got a book. Not a tablet, not a toy that requires batteries. A battered picture book with a cover half taped with blue painter's tape, as if painter's tape were talisman enough to make a thing last. He brought it over and thumped onto the rug like a frog into a shallow pond. He handed it to me. "Read it," he said. I looked at Nora because at some point you ask permission even if you don't believe in permission. She nodded, tiny, and put her hand on the back of the couch like she was the one who needed steadying. I opened to a page where a badly drawn bear speaks to a badly drawn moon. I did the voices. I slowed down on the parts where kids get their breath back without noticing. The chest rattled on the third page. Not angry, not hard. A quiver like a person's leg when the feeling comes back after it fell asleep. Cal didn't startle. He put his palm on the plastic as if to tell the thing inside that it wasn't alone. "Quieter," he murmured to it, bossy and kind. I read. I let the syllables fall the way rain does when it remembers it has time. I took the boy on the picture book walk where he has walked 100 times and pretended with him that this was the first. I kept one eye on the handle out of habit and maybe out of fear of being humiliated by being wrong about everything. By the 7th page, the chest stilled. You think stillness is nothing until you see a noise decide to stop. It's an active thing. It pulled its edges in. The fog on the plastic cleared, little by patient little, like someone on the other side had stopped breathing through their mouth and learned how to nose breathe. "Thank you," said a voice that was barely a voice, so breathy it might have been the sound air makes when it finds a leak. It came from the seam where the lid met the body. It came from everywhere. It came from back in a garage where a boy had been 8 and good at being alone. Cal's eyes went wide and then soft. "You're welcome," he whispered, "because some good manners are born into people if you get lucky." Nora had her hand over her mouth. She didn't cry. She didn't panic. If you'd asked me the day before, I would have said she'd do either. Instead, she watched like she had decided to take an oath later and needed to be sure the words would matter. I finished the book. The last page stuck a little to my thumb where humidity lives. The chest did not move again. The room was not quiet, but it had the feeling of quiet, which is better. "It likes the story," Cal said. "It likes that you like the story," I said. "Is it a monster?" he asked. "It is something that can be a monster," I said, and saw Nora's head lift, every part of her on guard like a dog that hears a car before the gravel crunch. "And also something that can be a friend." "Like Dad's," he said, and I don't know if he meant the kind he had or the kind he wanted or the kind the world promises on television but forgets to deliver. "Like Dad's," I said, because a room that has decided to be gentle will let you say something like that without punishing you for it. He put his cheek against the plastic again and whispered something I pretended I didn't hear. It sounded like stay. It sounded like don't leave when I sleep. I looked at Nora. "You see why I brought it," I said, "not to scare you, to see what the stories do, to see if there's a way to keep them from needing to be the worst thing they can be." "By reading to them," she said. If sarcasm had a weight, hers didn't that moment. Her face had the look people get when they are deciding whether to be brave in a new way. "By being kind on purpose. By feeding them the right noise," I said, hearing Fletcher's sentence come out of my mouth and hating that I was borrowing his logic even as I loved that it might be true. "What happens if you don't?" she asked. "You saw the door on the news," I said. "You're going to leave that here," she said, not as an order, not as a refusal. "Tonight," I said. "If you'll let me, if he'll let it." Nora set her jaw the way people do when they are about to say yes to a thing with teeth. "It stays closed," she said. "You do the voices, And if my son has nightmares, I'm sending them to your house." "Deal," I said. We tucked Cal back in with the book on his chest and the chest in the living room. He fell asleep the way kids fall off cliffs in cartoons. One step too far and then suddenly the ground is a bed. Nora stood in the hall without leaning, like leaning would mean falling. I stood next to the chest and listened to nothing, which was a sound I had learned to cherish. "Coffee," she said, in the tone that means I want company but I don't want to ask. "In a minute," I said. "Let me log this." I took the company phone out of my pocket to snap the picture I always snapped, even when the aisle was a home. The lock screen lit my face with the ugly blue of corporate devices born for fluorescent rooms. Alerts had stacked up while I'd been reading. The top one was from a local news app that chased police scanners for clicks. The headline sprawled in all caps because free journalism still thinks fear needs font size. "Interstate closures after box truck hijack, driver missing. Cargo unrecorded charity chests." The second alert came from the county emergency text system. I-77 NB closed between exits 2327 due to debris. Avoid area. The third was a number I didn't recognize and knew anyway. I thumbed it and let it live in my ear before the first ring landed. "You picked a good night to test," Fletcher said, and in the background I heard a radio I hoped wasn't a police radio and a printer's little chirp the moment before it spits a lie. "What happened?" I said, not a question, a floor. "An entire shipment," he said, "gone off route. Our friends are out of their boxes." "Friends," I said, and the word was a set of keys in someone else's hand. "Where?" "North," he said. "Headed for the church we don't use anymore. The one with the rainbow window that leaks." Nora watched my face while I listened, and when I nodded because if I didn't do something with my head it would float away, she nodded too because sometimes bodies agree before brains get the memo. "I'll be there," I said, because someone had to say it out loud to make the next sentence true. "But I'm leaving one here." Fletcher didn't scold me. He didn't say the rules. If anything, he sounded relieved. "Good," he said. "Feed what needs feeding. Then come see what happens to the hungry when nobody tried." The call clicked off. The room went back to being a room. The chest sat like a promise or a threat, depending on whether you had eaten. Nora reached for the remote. On the local station, a helicopter shot showed a snarl of emergency lights on the interstate and a box truck on its side like a beetle, crawling along the guardrail, slow and purposeful as a river remembering a shortcut, was a shape I recognized even rendered in the flat gray of night vision. "We're not done reading," I told the chest, and put my hand on the plastic because sometimes ceremony is the only thing between you and the worst version of the story. Out on I-77, hope chests without homes were about to learn the wrong kind of lessons. Inside a small house on a quiet street, a boy snored into a pillow he trusted. The room smelled like shampoo and patience. The chest didn't rattle. My phone buzzed again with a new alert before the anchor finished saying developing. The headline was shorter this time because fear didn't need more letters. Missing. Entire shipment of hope chests. The interstate was still closed when I reached the barricades, but Fletcher had already warned me about official detours. He didn't mean the kind with orange cones. I left the car 2 miles short and hiked the rest, boots sucking mud, flashlight beams swallowed by fog. The Appalachians weren't mountains so much as hunched old backs, their trees nodding together like arthritic fingers. The church sat on a ridge too small for a proper town and too big to be ignored. The rainbow glass in its rotting front window sagged in a spiderweb of cracks. A clapboard sign leaned in the weeds, the paint flayed off until only the word hope remained. I told myself that was irony, but hope has claws. The lock on the basement doors had already been cut. The chain lay coiled like a dead snake. I pushed inside. The air hit me like a punch, sharp varnish overlaid with wet rot, cedar drowned in mildew. My stomach seized. Each breath carried ammonia sting like someone had spilled industrial cleaner over spoiled fruit. I clicked on the flashlight. The beam shook against the stone steps as I descended. The basement was bigger than I expected, more like a crypt than a cellar. Stone arches held up the ceiling, but the mortar was crumbling in gray streaks. Water ran in trickles down the far wall, feeding patches of black mold that shimmered in the light. And everywhere, stacked in rows, crammed into alcoves, were the chests. Dozens, maybe hundreds. They rocked in unison, not violently, not yet, but enough to send a chorus of wood-on-stone groans echoing through the chamber. Plastic wraps stretched and squealed, straps quivered. The smell made me gag into my sleeve. And then the whispers began. At first it was just air through cracks. Then it gained shape. Words low and layered until the walls themselves seemed to vibrate. Mother, mother, mother. The chant spread chest to chest, row to row, until the whole basement throbbed with it. Each lid rattled, each hinge flexed, the voices overlapping in a wave of desperate prayer. I pressed my back against a pillar, trying to steady the light. My brain screamed to run, but my feet rooted. The sight was hypnotic, like watching a field of grass bending in the same unseen wind. One chest pitched forward, caught only by its strap. The voice inside grew louder, shriller, until the others joined in harmony. Mother, mother, mother. The stone groaned as if the chant itself pressed against it, and over the noise my phone buzzed. A text from Fletcher. Do not interrupt. I killed the screen and raised the light higher. That's when I saw him. At first I thought it was Fletcher himself, same horn-rimmed glasses flashing in the beam, same neatly pressed shirt, same unshakable calm. But no, this man was taller, leaner. His hair was cut too sharp, his smile too thin. He stepped out from between two rocking stacks as if he'd been there all along, hands folded neatly in front of him. The chant didn't falter at his presence. If anything, it grew steadier, like he was their conductor. Evening, Daniel, he said, voice smooth as varnish. You're right on time. The glasses caught the light again, hiding his eyes, and my gut went cold, because Fletcher wasn't the only supervisor. The man with the horn-rimmed glasses didn't hurry. He didn't raise his voice to be heard above the chant. He didn't have to. The basement seemed to lean toward him, the way a room sometimes bends toward the person who knows the script. You thought Ash Pines was special, he said, folding his hands like a patient schoolteacher. One lonely warehouse in the woods, chests stacked to the rafters, your mister, Fletcher playing caretaker. He smiled thinly. The lenses of his glasses caught the flashlight beam and hid his eyes. But there are dozens of them, Daniel, dozens. Appalachia alone has 6. The Carolinas 8, Florida 12, each with its own staff, its own distribution routes, its own experiments. Ash Pines is just the one you happen to find. My stomach turned cold. Dozens, each like the place where I'd nearly been crushed, eaten, or worse. Dozens humming with voices like these. And all of them, he added, serve the same purpose. The chant above us swelled, mother, 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 until it drowned the drip of water, the scrape of my boots, even the beat of my own heart. He tilted his head toward the sound, reverent. Every brood needs an anchor, something to keep them calm, to remind them where they came from. The wild ones you've seen, but the tamed mothers, oh Daniel, you'll see. He gestured, and two men I hadn't noticed before emerged from the shadows of the nave above, each holding a lantern. Their faces were blank in the yellow glow, expressions so mild they looked erased. They moved aside a partition of rotting boards. The smell hit me first, swamp rot thick with iron-hot breath that clung to the back of my throat. Chains clinked, and then it moved. She filled the nave, a mass of scaled muscle and scar tissue tethered by links as thick as my wrist. Each shackle was bolted into the foundation, the stone groaning with her restless weight. Her frilled jaw sagged, revealing teeth like broken gravestones. But her eyes, God, her eyes. One massive pupil widened in the lantern light, rolling until it fixed on me. The black swallowed all else, reflecting my own outline like a shadow caught in tar. She croaked, low and rumbling, and the chests in the basement answered at once. The chant shifted from mindless repetition to harmony, voices layered like a hymn, pleading, worshiping. Mother, mother, mother. The supervisor spread his hands as if to present her. Each community keeps one. Part guardian, part god, part jailer. With a mother near, the whelps remain manageable. Without her, the chained beast shuddered, rattling her manacles until dust rained from the rafters. Her tongue, white, segmented, slick, slid out to taste the air. She sniffed once, twice, and then she found me. Her croak deepened, echoing through the nave like a pipe organ played underwater. The voices of the hope chests faltered, then steadied again. The lantern light wavered. My knees nearly buckled, because in the tilt of her head, the narrowing of her pupil, there was recognition. Not of prey, of me. The chain link screamed as she strained forward, the whole nave quivering under her pull. And in that thunderous, suffocating moment, I knew she remembered. She remembered me. I didn't drive straight home from the church. I told myself I would, that I'd sleep on a couch that still smelled faintly of the woman who'd left, wake up at noon, and decide I'd imagined a chained god with a pupil the size of a dinner plate. Instead, I found my hands turning the wheel for me, guiding me down County Road 19 and up the gravel tongue to Ash Pines. The warehouse sat like a reprimand, square, plain, unamazed by anything I'd learned. The new door was a plywood patchwork held in place with carriage bolts and prayer. The county would call it flood damage on the report. They would list high winds and fallen branch. The bracket someone had welded over the jamb would tell a different story to anyone who knew to speak that language. I keyed in, shouldered through, and let the dark swallow me whole. The smell hit first, as always. Varnish over cedar, citrus over ammonia, the ghost of bleach that never did the job it promised. Under it, something else, like fruit that had ripened too fast in a closed room. I didn't turn on more light than the law required. My flashlight cut a white tunnel. Dust swam through it like fish that didn't know better. The fans sat quiet on their chains, proud of their stillness. Somewhere far off, water ticked where the storm had found a way in and then changed its mind about staying. I told myself I was here to check damage. I put the clipboard under my arm like a talisman of normalcy. What I wanted, what I couldn't say out loud even alone, was proof. The word felt like a coin I'd been palming for days, hot, thin, ready to fall. Down the third aisle, 2 shelves up, a chest had shifted half an inch since the last time my camera caught it. I knew because my camera catches everything, and because the body develops a sixth sense for disorder when the cost of missing it is teeth. The strap was taut but unbroken. The plastic wrap had fogged in an oval near the seam like a mouth had breathed from the inside. "Easy," I said, to wood, to steel, to myself. I slid a palm to the handle to recenter the weight the way you do with things that don't like surprises. The chest answered me. Not a knock, those polite taps we'd come to treat like manners. Not a scrape. This was a thud from within, 2 beats, small but insistent, like a fist that had just realized what fists are for. The fogging widened. The plastic hissed. I watched the seam in profile the way you watch a snake from a safe distance and then decide there isn't one. Under the film, the lid kissed up and down against its latch, testing. "Don't," I whispered, and then wanted to laugh at myself for telling wood what to do. How many days was it going to take before I admitted the world had expanded beyond the things I had language for? Another thud, then a reaching. I don't have better words for it. The sense that something inside pressed its palms to the underside of the lid and considered leverage. The chest rocked once, twice, straining against the strap that kept it from pitching. "Fletcher," I said out loud, though I had not dialed and had no intention of warning him. The syllables steadied me. Names can be spells if you hold them right. I stood on the lower rack's rail, boot on steel, knee against upright, and leaned until my chest touched wrap and cedar. Close the varnish made my eyes water. The seam breathed on my lip. "Hey," I said into the gap, "wait." The word went in like a coin down a well. The chest stilled. For a heartbeat of silence I could hear nothing but the flutter of my own pulse. Then a heart answered, thin, too quick, not mine. "No," I said, softer. "Not yet. I'll help." The pad of my thumb found the latch. Everything that mattered about the next minute was a negotiation between promise and rule, between hunger and fear, between what I had agreed to be by signing forms in a neat cube, and what I had become by hiding in a freezer while a god tasted the seam. "Don't open the crates," Fletcher had said. "Open them properly." Another voice in me said, one I didn't recognize until later as the same voice that had told me as a boy how to lift a lid without slamming my fingers. I slipped my knife under the pallet wrap and drew a neat T. One slit parallel to the seam, one perpendicular down toward the handle. The plastic gave with a sweet little sound like a seal breaking on a jar that thinks it contains jam. The air that escaped was warm and fruity, dangerously sweet, like bruised peaches in August left under newspaper. The ammonia rode in the back, stinging the way a clean lie stings. The latch slid. The lid rose a fraction. I gave it 2 fingers' worth of lift, no more. A thin strip of darkness showed where wood stopped and wood began, the space between ribs when someone is holding their breath. "Easy," I said, "slow." Something small pressed through. I have no clean metaphor for the first glimpse of a whelp outside a chest. My hand wants to write a fist, but the fingers were too long for that, each tipped with a baby version of those blunt claws I'd seen pry a door out of a wall. The skin was translucent, the web of veins visible like lines on a cheap map, a touch of blue where blood guessed its direction. It flexed against swallowed light and plastic and my breath, uncertain of the math. Another press, and a second hand joined it. They groped the seam and found the world and did not retreat. The lid trembled, the strap groaned. I grabbed the hinge side with my free hand to keep the chest from pitching off the rack like a berth gone wrong. "Not yet," I whispered, and I don't know if I meant for my sake or for its. "We're going to do this without breaking anything." For a heartbeat I thought of calling Nora, of putting the phone on speaker and letting Cal's simple whisper, "You're welcome," be the first sound the whelp learned from a human mouth. Instead, I made the mistake every new parent makes. I thought my voice would be enough. "Hi," I said, lower than a murmur, the syllable shaped with the part of my mouth you use for secrets. "Hi there." The hands paused. The chest made a tiny whining whir inside that wasn't breath and wasn't machine. The fingers curled, uncertain whether to take the lid or my thumb. I moved my thumb away and pressed the wood gentle in a way that said, "I'm here, you won't fall." The lid lifted another fraction, my fingers paying out permission like line. A face rose. Face is generous. A curved hump smooth as candle wax where a brow would be. Below it a pair of not-quite eyes, dark, glistening, still webbed with the film of not being used. Below that, a mouth shape learning its edges. The white segmented tongue I had come to hate in the large ones was not yet divided here. It lay heavy, like dough, swelling and receding with the thing's breathing. It squinted, do whelps squint, and the pupils gathered themselves to a point the way sunflowers find the sun. The point they found was me. It made a sound I recognized from 100 baby monitors and 12 emergency rooms and one old freezer, a suffering little coo that begs the world to be easier. "Okay," I said. "Okay." And I didn't realize until later that I was copying the exact cadence my mother had used when she was trying to tuck the nights into the days as if days could hold them. With my free hand, I reached for the strap and slid it off the corner without letting the weight rest on the lid. The chest leaned toward me. I leaned back to keep it in place, knee locked into the rack like a breaker bar on a rusted bolt. "Slow," I said. "We do slow or we stop." The whelp did slow. That's what I remember most clearly against the watercolor of smells and thuds and the tick-tick-tick of somewhere in the rafters adjusting itself. It wasn't a flood. It wasn't the tearing of a bag. It was a patient shift of choices. It lifted one palm and set it on the rail of the rack, splayed fingers as if learning the texture of steel, and gripped. It let the weight of its not-yet head rest against the lid edge and levered. It didn't yank against my resistance, it followed it. It moved by agreement. The head rose enough to show the ridge of a skull. A soft-ridged crest ran from brow to nape, flexible as cartilage, firming where it met the back. A tiny frill, nothing like the shredded banners I'd seen hang from the jaw of the chained mother, but a suggestion of its future, trembled at the sides where a human child would have ears. "Hi," I said again, foolish, brave. It tasted the air. Its tongue found the wood near my hand, then slid across the back of my fingers with a wet firmness that made every tendon in my arm want to recoil. I didn't. I held like a parent holds, pretending to be stronger than he is. "Easy," I breathed, and then to myself because I was shaking in my forearms, "easier." We did our awkward dance for another minute, 2:10. It could have been an hour and I would have believed it. My world narrowed to inch and breath and grip. And then the whelp made a choice that I had not expected. It stopped. It let go of the rail. It lowered its head the tiniest bit. It pushed, deliberately, carefully, against the lid the way a puppy pushes its skull into a human palm. It wanted contact, not just permission, press. That was the moment I really decided that the writers of the program had gotten one part right. Hunger is one engine, contact is the other. You can run a society on fear for a while. If you want a civilization, you need gentleness. I flattened my hand over the lid and applied pressure to match, the universal language of here and now, and I'm not going anywhere. The whelp trembled under it, not fear. Not yet. The trembling of a thing recently alive. My arms burned. The strap creaked. The chest settled back on the steel. The lid found its hinges true and the seam narrowed to a line. I eased the latch back into place like a surgeon placing a stitch. "Soon," I said to the crack, but not in a panic, not in the wrong room. The reply was soft enough that if I had kept the headphones on, Fletcher's rule I had broken again, I would have missed it. "Neil," a whisper, half-formed, like a child trying a teacher's first name behind her back. "I'm Daniel," I said, then realized teaching names was a kind of binding, and wondered if I had just signed another form without seeing it. The whelp didn't knock again. It rested. I rested my cheek against the cedar and discovered the chest held warmth like a mammal. I didn't open any more crates that night. I didn't prowl the aisles for movement like a cat hunting a laser pointer. I sat on the lower rail of the rack with my knees too high and my back too cold, and let my body remember the cost of adrenaline. Somewhere between the second big breath and the third, I realized the smell in the air had shifted. The fruit had given way to something like damp bread dough proofing in a bowl. It was almost peaceful. When the two-way on my belt chirped, I didn't flinch. I lifted it to my mouth and pressed the side button with the weary ease of men whose jobs require them to answer when something buzzes. "Go," I said. "Status." Fletcher's voice, thinner than in person, carried that cheerfully neutral tone you learn if you want people to tell you the truth without noticing they have. "Door holds," I said. "Fans off." One moved and I handled it. "Handled," he said, tasting the word like a mango spooned slowly. "Did you learn anything?" "They'll follow if you lead slow," I said. "They'll push if you push. They'll chew if you yank." "That's 3 of the 10, he said like a catechism man. "Did you read?" I looked down at the book I didn't remember taking out of my bag, the battered Bare-End Moon from Nora's living room. I had brought it like a man brings a flask. "Later," I said. "I talked." "That'll do," he said. He paused, and in the pause I could hear his bone-dry fingers rubbing together on the other end. "Stay until dawn, then rest, and Daniel." "Yes." "Don't name it," he said gently. "Not yet." He clicked off. I set the radio on my thigh like a sleeping bird and sat until the concrete leached the heat out of me. Dawn is a rumor in a building with no windows big enough to be honest. You know it by smell more than light. The cold changes brands. It was enough to convince me home existed. I took the long route to the office cube to add lines in a log with time stamps nobody checks, except the person looking for acquaintance with Dawn. I poured coffee, coaxed it into behaving, and left the mug untouched. On my way out, I stopped by the chest. The fog on the plastic had dried. When I pressed my ear to the seam, I heard sleep, that little flutter wheeze that would scare you in a human baby until the doctor on the nurse line told you some lungs need to learn. "Soon," I said to me. "We'll do this soon, right?" I went home and slept for 2 hours and dreamed the warehouse had a heartbeat that matched mine. I woke with my cheek against my forearm and the imprint of my own watchband like a cautionary tale. When I came back that night, I brought a plan. Nothing elaborate. Men like me convince themselves that grown-up plans require flowcharts, but the best ones often fit on the inside of a palm. Mine was the same plan Cal had taught me in a living room that smelled like shampoo and solving. Read. Breathe. Match. Reward patience with story. Reward hunger with contact, not teeth. I slid the ladder card up to the shelf like a guilty accomplice. I cut the plastic again, careful, neat. I lifted the latch a stranger's width. I put the book on the rail within my reach and angled the little office lamp I'd borrowed so its cone of warmth fell on the seam and not into it. "Evening," I said. The chest answered this time without the knock. The lid breathed back. The hands came, more certain now, fingers flexing against air like the air was a new idea. The head rose quicker. The pupil found me in one smooth roll instead of the blind searching from last night. "Slow," I said. It slowed. I propped the lid with a wooden spacer I'd whittled on my lunch break out of shame and hope. It kept me from being the hinge, that was the point. If I was going to teach anything worth keeping, it had to be repeatable by people who weren't me. "Tonight," I said, laying the book open where the pictures showed the badly drawn bear muddling through the dark, "we start with voices. I read, not because I thought whelps loved bears, but because I believed cadence can keep a thing from running. I read like my mother had on the good nights when she wasn't too tired or too sore or too angry. I read the way Nora had wanted to and sometimes couldn't. I did the voices that had surprised a boy into letting go of a tantrum's rope. The whelp watched. That verb, watched, is another generous one, but something in it followed the rhythm of my mouth. It tilted when my tone rose as if tone made gravity skew. When the bear on the page looked up at the moon, the whelp's not yet skull tipped skyward as if imitation were a body function like breathing. "Good," I said without thinking, and with that word I became something I had not meant to be. I didn't touch it, not at first. I let the book do the touching, words stroking an air that had no skin. When I turned a page and paused, I copied teachers and dog trainers and men who have learned that a beat held too long is an invitation. The whelp pushed against the lid eager, then controlled itself, then trembled, then stilled, and I rewarded the still with the next sentence. We made a relationship out of pause and gift. It is my favorite kind. It takes longer. It holds better. When the story ended, I closed the book with that soft, papery slap that tells even the smallest children that the time you made is about to become another time. The whelp murmured something like a whine and then swallowed the sound, practicing manners the way children practice their letters, imperfectly, beautifully. "You did good," I said. I let the lid settle by a sliver and watched how it moved, whether it resisted or rested. It rested, shivering only once the way muscles do when they've been asked to carry more than they have before. "Tomorrow we try the rail," I said. "Tomorrow hands, tonight is eyes." The whelp blinked slowly, the film peeling and rejoining, and I felt that queer surge behind the breastbone where pride is born even in men who swore they didn't want children and men who parented themselves. "Sleep," I said, ridiculous. I slid the spacer out and let the sump of the lid find the exact notch it had been cut for. The latch kissed shut with a sound I decided to treat like a yes. I cleaned up the cut wrap and put it in a bin because if you are training anything you should not leave evidence of your laziness around. I took one photo because part of me still belonged to a bureaucracy that obsesses over baseline. I walked the aisles because habits can be prayers. And then, just because I could not help myself, I went back and put my palm flat against the wood where the motto would be and said, "Every child deserves," and stopped, because the full sentence made me want to cry. The answer from inside wasn't words. It was a settling, a small happy weight. On the third night we tried the rail. My spacer did its job, the lid came up 2 inches, then 4. The hands found the edge by themselves. When they curled over it, I put my fingers alongside, not helping, not holding, not patronizing. Present. "Up," I whispered. The whelp pulled. It didn't jerk, didn't fight. It hauled the newest part of itself high enough that a shoulder cleared the rim. The shoulder was no longer glassy. A matte skin had formed, thin but distinct, like liquid cooled into a surface. The skin had a pattern beneath, a memory of scales that would harden later, a ghost of armor still choosing it. Good, I said. It froze in that written by God's posture all babies learn, the one that says if I hold perfectly still, the world will decide to keep me. I did not reach to help. I was learning too. It dragged one knee, if that's what it was, up, then the other, then over, and then it was half out, belly on cedar, breath on air. For a long minute we did nothing but breathe at one another. The little frills fluttered. The pupils gathered. The tongue rolled out and in, tasting the room for stories. Then the whelp did the thing I had not planned for. It tried to stand. It didn't have the right angles yet, but posture is as contagious as yawning. It read mine and copied. It pushed until its spine found a line that resembled mine. It set its hands, not paws, not claws, hands on its thighs the way men do when they rise from low benches. It lifted its chin and cocked it the way I had without meaning to, because necks like to check that heads are still attached. Then came the walk. 2 steps along the shelf, awkward, deliberate, triumphant, tracing my path where I balanced on the rung below. It wobbled when I wobbled. It matched me like a shadow late in the day, a fraction slow, perfect in intent. The sound it made while it walked, holy God! Tiny laughter is the closest human thing I can compare it to, but the laugh lived more in the chest than the throat, an exhale of delight at having a body, at the news that gravity could be bargained with. When I stopped, it stopped. When I reached for the book, it reached for the book, the hand smudging the ink, the claw tips careful on the paper's edge. When I opened to a new story, it tilted its head to the same angle as I did, as if comprehension comes best when neck muscles agree. At the 4th page, when the bear said something vulnerable to the moon, the whelp said it back to me. Not the words, the tone, in my voice. My ribs flared with something I will never be able to explain to anyone who hasn't heard their own voice come back to them from a throat that did not belong to them. It was a better version, somehow cleaner, as if the whelp had chosen my confidence and left my fear. We practiced. I would read, then I would stop and say, "Your turn," because routines are scaffolds. It would make a noise not like mine. It would listen to the noise it had made as if it were a teacher, and then repeat it closer to mine. The 2nd time would come out nearer. The 3rd time nearer still. By the 5th, I couldn't tell if I was hearing myself or being flattered by a gifted impersonator. Daniel, it tried and came up with D-N-L and then Danel, and I thought my knees would unhinge. I closed my eyes and had to open them immediately, because the warehouse at night doesn't allow you to act like you are alone. "Me," I said, and placed my palm on my chest because kids need symbols as much as adults do. "Me," it said, and placed its hand on the wood. The claws clicked softly, otherwise the sound was mine. We did this until we were both tired in the way you get when victory has required more muscles than you knew you had. I placed the spacer back on the rung. I did the lid slowly. The whelp did not fight. It nested back into itself with trust enough to shame me. "Tomorrow," I said, "we try the floor." I had not asked anyone's permission. I did not text Fletcher. I did not ask my father's ghost whether pride counted if there was nobody there to clap. I cleaned up. I wrote in the log. I poured coffee I did not drink. I sat on the office chair that always rocked left because one wheel had given up the pretense of being a circle. I stared at the freezer until I had forgiven it for scaring me into being a child I thought I'd aged out of. When the first hint of morning recolored the narrow skylights, I went back and did a thing I promised myself I wouldn't do and always was going to. I pressed my ear to the seam and whispered, "Do you know me?" The answer came at once and without strain in the voice I had just taught it, matching my breath the way dancers match each other when they count without numbers. A single word, soft, certain, the strike of a match in a room that had prepared kindling. Father. Fletcher didn't come in like a boss checking time cards. He came in like a man walking into his own living room, coffee in one hand, the other already busy brushing invisible dust from his too white shirt. The warehouse seemed to know he was there. The aisles went still, the fans hummed in tune, even the smell seemed to dial itself down to tolerable. "Daniel," he said, as if my name were a greeting and a verdict. "You've done well, better than expected." He set the coffee on the desk, sat down, and opened a briefcase I hadn't noticed him carrying. Inside were stacks of folders, neatly tabbed, edges squared. The smell of paper was sharp, undercutting the cedar tang in the room. "I've spoken with the others," he said casually, like we were discussing a committee meeting. "They agree you're ready for the next step. A full handler, not just a watchman, training whelps for release, placement, socialization, the real work." The phrase lodged in my throat, the real work. Everything I'd endured, storms, whispers, mother's eye, had only been an audition. Fletcher slid the first folder across the desk. It was stamped with the little Miracle logo, cheerful colors that looked obscene in the dim office light. Inside were forms, names, addresses, photographs clipped to the corner. "Host families," Fletcher explained, "screened, eager, in need of hope. We place a chest in the home, supervise lightly, and observe. The whelps learn what they are meant to be: companions, guardians, caretakers. Without this they wither, or worse." He opened another file, a smiling couple with 3 children. Handwritten notes in his familiar cursive, responsive to bedtime routine, mimic developing, minimal correction required. Another folder, a widow in her 50s, 2 grandchildren in her care. Notes, bonded early, protective behaviors strong, potential for over-attachment. Fletcher turned page after page, the lives of strangers reduced to checkboxes and margins. Each child's photograph looked suddenly fragile, as though they were already being watched from inside their own rooms. "You'd be part of this," Fletcher said. "Not just guarding crates in the dark, teaching them, shaping them, ensuring they bond to the right kind of love." I reached for one folder without waiting for him. The tab read "Host Family, Tri-County Region." I opened it, and my breath caught. The surname on the first page wasn't just familiar. It was a ghost pulled out of my past. Nora's last name, printed in block letters with her address neatly typed below. Attached, a photograph of her house, the chain-link fence, the sagging awning. And beside it, a snapshot of Cal clutching a toy truck, smiling with the unguarded grin only 5-year-olds wear. My hands went numb. The page trembled in my grip. "Daniel." Fletcher's tone was careful now, as though he already knew. I skimmed the notes, heart hammering. "Bonded successfully, displays calming influence. Whelp responsive to bedtime reading. Host mother cautious but compliant." Every word branded itself into my skull. I slammed the folder shut, but the image of Cal's grin wouldn't leave me. "Nora never signed up for this," I said. "She didn't have to," Fletcher replied softly. "The child did." The warehouse seemed to tilt around me. My pulse roared in my ears. All the nights I'd spent telling myself the chest at her house had been a controlled test, a favor, an exception collapsed into a lie. The file was proof. Her child had already bonded. And the whisper of memory rose again from that night in her living room, the chest fogging under Cal's small hand, the tiny voice thanking him back. Had I delivered him to it, or it to him? I looked up. Fletcher's pale eyes glimmered behind his horn rims. "Tell me, Daniel," he said. "Do you want to keep him safe or leave him to chance?" They'd called me that once in the storm. The word hissed through cedar and plastic until it sharpened to a point. Death Man. It had stuck in some cul-de-sac of my brain, a shard I couldn't work loose. I told myself it was nonsense, a child's mispronunciation from a throat still learning shapes. But the longer I lived with the whelps, the more I understood. Their words weren't metaphor, they were diagnosis. And tonight, a mother had come to make it true. She found me at the edge of town, where the flood had turned the rail yard into a shallow lake. Intermodal cars stood in ankle-deep water like red and blue islands. The chain-link fences rattled with each guttering gust. Sodium lights smeared the rain into orange veils. Somewhere down the line, a crossing bell dinged with no train to deserve it, a ghost still doing its job. I'd followed the sirens from the highway closure, then the slash of tire marks where a box truck had been peeled open like a sardine tin. By the time my boots hit ballast, the emergency crews had scattered to the far side of the yard, arguing about power lines. I cut between stacks of rusted couplers and pallets of soaked shrink wrap, and felt it in my teeth before I saw her. That frog organ bellow, that pressure change that announces thunder from inside your ribs. She slid across the water with a low, relentless grace. Mud and reeds clung to her plates, and for a moment she was a moving island herself. The frill along her jaw hung in tatters, scar ridges knitted across the back like badly mended seams. One clawed forelimb planted and pushed, concrete complaining under her weight. Her head lifted. The pupil widened until the whole eye went black. She saw me. "Mother," I said before I could stop myself, as if a title could soften an arrival. Rain cooled the back of my neck. The stink of swamp breath met creosote and diesel until the air tasted like an engine dying. She tasted back. The split white tongue spilled and unspooled, testing the yard's metal breath, finding my warmer thread in it. "Death Man," she croaked, not a word so much as a judgment. The sound ran under the water at my feet and made the ripples argue with each other. I didn't run, not because I'm brave, because I finally understood that running was the thesis statement of a predator-slash-prey story I refused to co-author. It took me too long to admit it, but I was done surviving by accident. Storms, freezers, luck, they'd kept me alive through other people's decisions. If I wanted to walk out of this yard upright, I had to pick a role and prove it. Nurturer or Death Man. She lurched forward, a body-length metal spines along her back shivering rain. Somewhere behind me, a forklift alarm chirped once, twice, then drowned in the wash. I stepped sideways between two stacked containers to funnel her approach, the way you control a spooked horse by narrowing the world to one choice. My boots slid on algae-slick steel and found ridged footing again. "Not death," I said, and my voice surprised me, steady, low, the tone I'd used with Cal when he was a live wire and with the whelp when it wanted to be brave faster than its bones would allow. "Listen." The mother's massive head tipped. Far off, sirens traded places. Closer, chests stolen from the truck, jury-rigged on pallets, half submerged, began to rattle in sympathy with her breath. The yard answered her like a choir that had rehearsed in secret. "Mother," they whispered. "Mother." She croaked back, the sound filling the cut between containers until the aluminum walls answered like drumheads. I felt the wash in my knees. If she lunged here, I'd be paced on corrugate. "Not death," I repeated. "I feed." The words sounded thin in the rain. I had brought nothing useful, no tranquilizer, no net, no plan beyond the thing I'd been learning in the aisles, how to make quiet in other bodies with the shape of my own. "SHH," I said, the universal lullaby sound, and out of pure, stupid instinct I reached out and touched the rusty container beside me as if it were a shoulder. It buzzed faintly with some leftover current the storm hadn't bothered to file paperwork for. Her tongue probed the air between us, found the metal, found my skin. She came on. I stepped back into the dark square halo of an open container, water sloshing around my boots. A forklift had left a pallet inside, stacked with empty produce crates, the vented kind that smell like wet lettuce even when they are clean. I climbed the pallet and ducked into the top crate, curling on my side until the slats framed the world in narrow photographs. It felt like the old freezer, like the yellow trunk, like the toy chests of every kid who ever learned to breathe through anger. I put my cheek against the plastic and let the rain patter drum on the container roof. "Here," I said into the crate's dark. "I'm here." Her head filled the doorway, black pupil swallowing the sliver of yard light behind her. The white tongue slid over the container's threshold and tasted the crate's rim. The sound of it on plastic, wet rope over rough pipe made me want to press my teeth hard enough to crack. "Listen," I said again, because repetition is mercy. "Listen." I began to read. It wasn't a book voice, no battered bear, no moon. It was the first story every handler learns how to tell without printing, the story of breath. I timed mine in fours like a beginner swimmer. In 2, 3, 4, hold 2, out 2, 3, 4. I made the exhale longer than the inhale, the way nurses teach new moms when panic makes the world a straw. "SHH," I said on the long out breath. "Good, good." She froze, not with predatory calculation, with the same confusion I'd seen so many times this past month, scaled up to cathedral size. The "is this for me?" Stall. If you're lucky, that's the hinge right there, that tiny reconsidering. If you can keep your fear from flapping in that second, something else can fit. I matched her. When she shuddered, I let one tremor through my shoulders and then smoothed it, demonstrating the shape. When her jaw frill quivered, I didn't flinch at the tattered horror of it. I widened my own stance a hair, grounding knees like an athlete waiting for the serve. "Easy," I whispered. "You're late to being loved, but not too late." Rain tattled against the container roof. Water ran under the crate and chilled my hip. Somewhere in the yard, chests tapped and went still, tapped and went still, learning with us. She pressed her tongue through the crate's slats. I didn't move. It found the seam near my temple and drew a wet line down to my jaw. I felt the divided tip hesitate at the corner of my mouth, tasting words as they left. "Not death," I murmured into it. "Look." I rolled an inch and let my hand show. Palm up, fingers open, no reach. The oldest mammal gesture there is. The claws came next, 5 of them, each like an antique piano key stained with tea. They set on the crate's rim and did not close into a grip. She was, God help me, learning manners. "Good," I said, the word a thumb stroke across a good dog's skull, "the way you mean you did a difficult thing and I saw it." I fed her that. I fed her the quiet that is proof. Her head dipped, slow, until the outer corner of that impossible eye aligned with me. The pupil narrowed to a deep brown coin. In the slick reflection I saw my own face, soaked, ridiculous, 30-something, and suddenly a father to anything that needed it. "Hungry," she croaked, but the word came for the first time without the snarl behind it. It sounded like a report, not a threat. "I know," I said. "I'll feed you the right way or not at all." It was weeks before the warehouse smelled normal again. The floodwaters receded, the fans hummed back to life, and the county filed its reports. Storm damage, vandalism, nothing supernatural. But for me, The silence after was louder than the storm itself. I sat in the office at Ash Pines with a yellow legal pad and a pen that kept bleeding through the paper, drafting something Fletcher never asked for. A protocol, not the old commandments of secrecy and fear. Don't open crates, don't touch the freezer, wear the headphones. This was different, humane, transparent. A program that didn't hide whelps in cedar coffins and hope families stumbled into the right behavior. Rule 1, never force a lid. Wait until the whelp knocks. Rule 2, teach with voice first, hands last. Rule 3, reward stillness with story, not silence. Rule 4, if they call you father or mother, answer. I copied them in triplicate, knowing Fletcher would burn them, knowing someone else might find them in the ash. Every child deserves a hope chest, I wrote at the top, and for the first time the motto didn't feel like a threat. Nora didn't forgive me all at once. Trust doesn't work that way. But she saw the change, the way I read to Cal without rushing, the way I let quiet hang in a room until he filled it with his own breath instead of my panic. And she saw the whelp, the one I had pulled from aisle 3, the one who learned to match my walk, my voice. We called it Lumen, a compromise name, human enough to fit in the house, strange enough to remind us what it was. Fletcher would have scolded us for naming it, but Fletcher wasn't raising a child in this house. Cal adored it. He treated it the way children treat stray dogs, bossy, kind, absolute in his belief that the creature belonged. He'd sit cross-legged on the carpet, holding up flashcards of letters while Lumen tilted its skull, tongue flicking, mimicking the shapes. Sometimes, when Cal lost his temper, the chest would rattle faintly in the corner. But the moment he opened a book or whispered please through his teeth, it would settle again. Nora once caught me watching them, eyes wet. She squeezed my hand and said, "You're not bad at this." I didn't tell her I'd spent most of my life believing I was. 2 summers later, the chest was too small. Lumen had grown taller than Cal, its frill brushing the ceiling fan, its claws thickening into blunt spades. It no longer fit into quiet corners. The day came without ceremony, a morning bright as a bell, dew burning off the grass. Cal was at the window, whispering goodbye without knowing that's what he was doing. Lumen pressed its hands against the glass, then turned toward the tree line. No lunge, no tearing, just a walk, a deliberate choosing of the woods over the house, of the wider world over the chest that raised it. We watched it go, a silhouette between oaks, until the green swallowed it. Cal cried. Nora held him. I let them both. I wanted to chain the moment down to keep the creature where I could see it, but that wasn't the protocol anymore. Every child deserves a hope chest. Every whelp deserves release. I whispered, "Go gentle," and for once I believed it would. That night, after Cal finally slept, I sat alone with the yellow trunk I'd once hidden in as a boy. I hadn't opened it in years. The cedar smelled faint and tired, but the motto was still there. Every child deserves a hope chest. And I remembered the whispers in the dark, the comfort that kept me from shattering while plates flew in the kitchen. I had thought it was imagination, a child's invention, but I knew now. It wasn't my voice I'd heard then. It wasn't my parents. It had been Fletcher. His cadence. His bone-dry click beneath words. He'd been there all along, a handler in my own dark, shaping me with patience until I could shape others. The thought chilled me and warmed me at once. Manipulation or salvation, I no longer knew which. Maybe both. I closed the trunk and sat in the dark of my own house. "Can you hear me?" I whispered, not to any one chest or creature, but to the silence itself, to the dark that had raised me, hunted me, saved me. The air pressed close. The quiet thickened. And then, faint as breath on cedar, almost too soft to believe, "We hear you." My throat closed, and I let the dark hold me the way I had once held them. The house stood still. The woods hummed beyond, and the world whispered back,